Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning for the regularly scheduled Public Safety and Emergency Management Committee. Today is Wednesday, July 17th, 2019, and my name is Alondra Cano. I am the chair of the committee, and I am joined by Councilmembers Steve Fletcher, Councilmember Jeremiah Ellison, and Councilmember Philippe Cunningham. Together, we are a quorum of the committee, and therefore we can conduct official business here this morning. We will be joined by Councilmember Lene Palmisano, who's just walking in the door, and Council Vice President Andrew Jenkins will be absent today due to other city business relating to public transit. So on our agenda today, we have 4 items. Our first item of business is to receive and file public comment, followed by a consent agenda, which is 2 items, a contract with John Gore Theatrical Group, Inc. for bomb detection at the Orpheum State and Pantages Theaters, as well as a contract with the University of Minnesota Veterinary Medical Center for Police Canine Health Services. And we will end with a presentation by the Minneapolis Police Department to discuss issues we are currently facing coming forward from our residents and how they relate to staffing. So that is our agenda before us. Are there any questions on the agenda? Seeing none, all those in favor of approving the agenda, please say aye. Aye. And we shall go ahead and start with item number 1. So this is a 30-minute public comment period. We welcome any and all community members, residents, leaders, groups, and organizations to come and address the Public Safety Committee on any items that are important to you. So we do have about 30 folks that have signed up to speak. And if you, throughout the course of the testimony, feel like you would like to speak and address the committee as well, you can just come over here behind the TV cameras. There should be a sign-in sheet for you to just put your name and your organization. So we just want to keep that as record to show that people came to speak today. So I'll read off the first 3 names, and we'll have the first person come up to the microphones, and if the next 2 people could then line up behind them to testify.
Madam Chair, I'm just hoping we can provide some guidance about time limits for speaking, given the large number of speakers. I want to respect everyone's time.
Yep, there is a timer right here, 3 minutes.
And is
so that's pretty typical, and so we'll just go ahead and keep track of the public speaking that's going on, and if for some reason we go over an hour, then we can readjust. But I think it's really important that people are here, and we want to hear from you. So you get 3 minutes to speak, and please try to stay within that time frame. Okay?
Madam Chair, if we have 30 people signed up to speak, that 3 minutes will get us to 90 minutes of public testimony just with the people who've already signed up. I'm requesting that we reduce it to 2 minutes for this public hearing.
I'm comfortable with an hour and a half to hear community members. I think it's really important that folks are here today. So if you have time constraints, you can kind of gauge your own time.
Okay.
Alrighty, so the first person is Lori Volkmutu, yes, and followed by Richard McNutt and Ion Isis. It's a little bit hard to read, so I apologize if I'm mispronouncing your name. But yes, please go ahead.
Good morning. My name is Lori Volkmuth, and I live on Sheridan Avenue in North Minneapolis. It appears to us in our neighborhood, at our block meetings we've held, that there's a revolving door in our justice system that so often defeats the actions of our police department, and we need to bridge this gap. Short and sweet. We also have traffic laws, and we need to enforce them for our community safety, for the safety of our children, our neighbors. Our neighborhood is a mix of old people like myself. I'm going to be 70. And then we have very young, new families coming in with very little children. And the speed alone is ridiculous. And of course, I stop them. I have no problem with that. But one of these days, I might not be so lucky of telling them, please slow down. We have children, and we care. On 49th and Russell Avenue North, it's a 3-way stop. I sat out there one day with my coffee, and I counted 237 vehicles, 1 squad car, 3 buses, cars, semi-trucks that blew these stop signs. Now, Lord knows how many more went through while I was having coffee at home with lunch and the potty breaks, but 237 is not an acceptable number in a residential area. We have big semis that come through there, and these signs were put in originally to control the traffic, to control the speed. Let's enforce it. And let's follow through in the courts with tickets or community service. There's a lot of projects that need to be done. We would love to have speed bumps in our alley, just love it, because they're using it as a thoroughfare. At the current time, it's $1,500 to purchase them. One person would be responsible for storing them for the winter. That's not an issue. We have volunteers to store them. $1,500 is just out of the ballpark for our neighborhood. $500 we can raise with garage sales and bake sales, and we're willing to do that. But $1,500, we need a break. We want our alleys safe. We want our communities safe. That's really about it. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. Richard McNutt, followed by Ian Isis. Richard? Is Richard here? Okay, so I'm sorry, ma'am, can you wait until...
Good morning. This is, I haven't been back in the United States now for more than a month over the past 10 years. So I've kind of seen just snapshots of how things have become in my neighborhood. Unfortunately, in my neighborhood just recently, we had a raid on a Section 8 rental home in our neighborhood, of which the police entered to serve a warrant on the brother of the legal tenant. And during the process, they dispatched 2 pit bulls, which I guess was, good for the pit bulls because they were being abused by the family. It's kind of sad to see the people hit them with a bat, then the teenager hits them with a bat, then the 4-year-old child hits them with a bat. So a very dysfunctional home. And that's tragic. And we watched, as and during the course of the warrant being served, drugs and guns were found. Also, we come to do start to look into the situation as a neighborhood, and we find that the occupant had weapons charges against her, and they were, pleaded down. She also, the brother that was there that the warrant was served on, their children were misbehaving, going up and down the streets, knocking over trash cans. The gentleman who lives in the neighborhood comes out, tells the kids quit doing that. The kids go tell their parents. The parents come back. One of the gentlemen that the warrant was served on, he assaults the man who has very severe PTSD, and that court case will be happening tomorrow. So, what's my point? My point is that I have witnessed in my neighborhood, some pretty bad things. Then the 4th of July came around, and the 4th of July, our neighborhood was virtually assaulted by the people in this household. It looked like a scene from the movie The Purge. Never seen anything like it in my life. We call the police because it's 4th of July. The police are assuming that, it's a noise complaint. I'm saying, no, it's a safety complaint. There's 30 individuals in this household, none of which are neighbors, and they're encouraging their kids who are running up and down the street with high-power ordnance. I'm not talking a bunch of kids with some bottle rockets and some, firecrackers and stuff. I'm talking some serious ordnance, of which they are throwing underneath cars and shooting at each other with. So this is what I observe. I ask the police, and the police say, well, we only have so many squad cars. We cannot react to these situations. So the people in the neighborhood see that the laws are not being enforced. They're seeing that, the laws are not being enforced, and that's why we need more police.
Appreciate you sticking to the time frame. Ayan and Sharon Day is next, followed by Tony Getz.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Ayan Isaac. I live see the Riverside neighborhood, and I'm here because we have problems about calling 911. They are not on time. When you call 911, you call, of course, for emergency. And every time you call 911, they're not going to be there at least 45 minutes. And when they come, sometimes they're not helping you what you need. And also, I'm here to say that my neighborhood need more police officers from 11 p.m. to morning, because we only have police officers that's there only 11 until 11 p.m. I think 4 p.m. to 11, and I don't think that's enough because of the safety. We have young men that's hanging around and I see the Riverside neighborhood, and I apologize. This is my first time to be here, and I think everything will be handled well. Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming. Sharon Day, followed by Tony Getz, and then Kaloni Fremont.
Buju, Nenendewe Marganidog. My name is Sharon Day. I'm the Executive Director of the Indigenous Peoples Task Force, and we're located at 1335 East 23rd Street. And we also have services for our youth, block over, and so at All Nations Church. And I just want to say that, you know, what we see every day are people who are homeless, people who are need services, need culturally specific services. We see Native American women being exploited. Go down Bloomington just about any time of the day or night, and you can see this. And what happened was, excuse me, what happened was, you know, last year we had the Wall of Forgotten Native Americans, and there was a navigation center that was created, but before any of those things happened, we had conversations with the city, and some of those conversations were that we needed short-term solutions, and we also needed long-term solutions. And you know, once the short-term solution came into play, the long-term solutions kind of went out the door. And so we need, you know, we're here today, a number of us are here today to talk about some of those things that we need. So we need employment, we need housing, and right now we need culturally specific services for, you know, this raging opioid epidemic that we see. Every morning, you know, at the task force we have a syringe exchange program, and every morning the first thing my staff do is they go and they do a sweep around our property. We have 14 units of residential housing. We do a sweep around our property, around MIWRC, and then over at the church. And before we can even enter in the morning with our step-up program for the church, you know, we've got to pick up stuff. Could be clothing, syringes. You know, people are sleeping in the doorway at the church, along the side. Yesterday, you know, we have, I can look out my window when I come to work in the morning, you know. One day I drove into the parking lot, and this young woman was in a van, and she said, hello, and I guess my time is up. But this goes on, and we need to get back to what is this long-term strategy, a comprehensive strategy that we can deal with the root causes and the ongoing causes of these issues. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Tony Getz, followed by Kaloni Fremont, and then Mario Eisman.
Hello, my name is Tony Getz. I'm 20 years old. I'm homeless. I'm a single father, trying to get my way through my GED. I just took my science test yesterday. I've reached out to multiple homeless shelters in a lot of places. I haven't got a call back from a single homeless shelter in like 4 months. And all I'm asking for is just like more resources for people like me and people like in my situation. There's not enough resources, you know, like it's hard. It's hard. And I just one thing I came here today is just to let you guys know that, you know, that it's a lot more stuff out there, you know. And I'm sorry, I'm really nervous right now. I've never done any public speaking in my life, but I just want to let you guys know that we need more help out here. There's a lot of more kids my age, you know, kids younger than me that are going through things worse than I am. And I've seen a lot, you know, especially in the Little Earth community over South Minneapolis. I mean, there's been nights where I ain't had nowhere to go. I had to sleep on park benches, and I've had to go to teen centers and parks just to get a bite to eat and to get water, you know? And it just seems like, I don't know. I don't have nothing more to say. I'm sorry.
Thank you. Kaloni, followed by Mario, and then Harrell Matthew.
Hello, my name is Kalani Fremont. I'm a resident in Little Earth community. I also work with SCOUT, which stands for Safe Community of United Tribes and Safety Champions of United Tribes. Today, what I would like to focus my attention on is homelessness. It's no secret that homelessness is a problem in Minneapolis. For instance, 1 year ago today, Minneapolis was facing the largest homeless encampment around. My family and I were a part of that, both volunteering and homeless ourselves. After the summer was passed, the homeless were provided with the navigation center to withstand the cold weather. After the center closed back in May, it led to a growing campers and overdoses. With the help with small resources given, these people tend to give up hope. From what I was shown volunteering with these people was that their spirits were brightened up with help, hope, and support. One thing that brought to them was having the resources come to them. Because of the homelessness in Little Earth, with people either sleeping anywhere, staying up all night, walking around, it'd be helpful to provide some type of resource in Little Earth. I know Little Earth will be a good party and help clear homelessness in our community, because Little Earth was my family's hope. It was a really long struggle with my family. 1 year ago today, we were living at the camp too. It may not seem like it, and you know, my family's really strong and we try to hold our pride up, but it was hard. I've never seen my grandparents struggle that much in my entire life. And I just want to see more, and I want to help more. I don't want to see any more of our youth or anyone out there homeless, and so that's why I think we need more resources that can come stand and be there instead of being someplace else where people sometimes don't have the tendencies to be able to walk that far or not even know the directions to get there. So it'd be helpful if we could have resources in our community like that. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll go with Mario and then Harrell, followed by Shanti LeJanice.
Hi guys, my name is Mario Eisman. I've lived in Little Earth for 23 years. I'm the third generation in Little Earth. I'm a youth worker in Little Earth. I just come with some bullet points that I want to touch base on you guys with. I was here 10 years ago as a youth voice, talking about some of these same problems. Now I'm here as an adult with kids of my own. The police brutality in my neighborhood. My personal relationship with the police hasn't been the best relationship with the police. I've never given them a reason to address me as anything other than such myself as Mario Eisman, a youth worker in Little Earth. I've been categorized as a criminal. You know what I'm saying? Same as some. And when I speak, I'm speaking on the whole community. There are other members here that couldn't be here that feel the same way that I feel, and have been categorized as well in the same of such as like we're all criminals and we're all dope addicts and we're all, you know, we just all are out here to hurt ourselves. And, you know, I had a police officer tell me that we gonna all kill each other off anyway, you know. Another thing is the police retaliation. I had, at the age of 16, I was beat up by the police. When I come down here to talk to the people about it, I was afraid for my life because I know how things go where I'm from. So this is actually the first time I've been able to actually like talk about that situation, and I gave them no reason. You know what I'm saying? And a lot of the youth deal with this on a daily basis because of where we're at. I guess what I'm trying to say is if we could get some type of funding or some type of help with police relationships, to have police come in and talk to some of our youth, to gain relationships and perhaps do some type of police training, community training, where they're getting trained by the community on how, you know, to better relationships, especially being in a Native community. Some type of indigenous training that we could try to implement the police officers with besides their own training and what they have to do. And just making this a family-oriented thing. Like I said, not everybody in Little Earth is the same. There are people out here actually trying to better Little Earth. Me being a community member and lived there for 3 generations, I've seen the worst, and I just pray for the better. And I hope that you guys do too. Thank you.
Thank you. So we'll have Harel come up, followed by Shante and Daniel
Chantel.
Corona after that.
Chantel. Can y'all hear me? I do have vocal cord issues, so sometimes it goes off and on. My name is Harel Matthew. I work for the Little Earth community as a youth pathway advocate for Scout. And I want to start off by saying that I get the chance to work with youth like Tony and Kehlani. I experience and see secondhand some of the experiences that they have, especially dealing with what Mario just spoke about. We had a small teen group yesterday that dealt with some of the harassment. They're all homeless, and they all need direct resources. There's not enough resources within that radius for them. Because I do think about a moment where one of my teens was like, how do you expect me to get somewhere if I've been walking around for 12 hours? I don't have money to get on a bus. So how do I get to these resources? What's in place for me to take those next steps? And I think that's where we need more support, meeting people where they are. How do we help the next generation and uplift them? And I also want to speak on what Scout is, because for people that aren't familiar, Scout is an initiative that works with the Little Earth community, and I would say spearheaded by the residents, which is our safety champion teams. They all live in Little Earth. We do have a lot of connections, we do have a lot of relationships. We work with the police, but we don't move and we don't do anything without the residents' input. They come first, and if they feel like this isn't the right step and they need more support or they're not in an equal partnership, we stop what we're doing. So we navigate on 3 different sort of programs, and you hear the other program managers speak, like Cassandra and Mackenzie. I work with the youth to try to find sustainable ways to reach their definitions of success, especially the teens and the young adults, because a lot of them are dealing with these on a day-to-day basis. Unless you're on the ground, listening to them speak, you have no idea at all. And then you're also talking about the younger kids. A lot of the people here have kids and are grandparents. They see the same things you see. They may not have the words to talk about what they're experiencing, but all that trauma is compounding. It's going to come out, and we need more resources to address those things and make sure it comes out in healthy ways. Because at the end of the day, if you make the wrong move, these are the next generations. It will come back and affect all of us. So we want to make sure that we're putting our time, effort, and support within the community and not just have people coming in saying what needs to be done. Because not every mold fits every community. Little Earth is very unique. It's the only place like that in the country. So please be mindful and listen to what's being spoken. Thank you.
Thank you. Chantel, followed by Daniel Corona, and then Cassandra Holmes.
Hello, my name is Chantal Agenais. I'm a Little Earth resident, and I also sit on Scout, and I'm the Lyra Board president. And I have fear, not just for my grandchildren, but for all the youth in Little Earth. Sorry. Because of all the shooting and drive-by that's happening at Cedar Field. One of my primary concerns is safety for our next generation. Sorry. Too often we react as scared victims. And we need to get to a more proactive state of mind. And that's why I want us to get a safety planning going, not just for our youth, but for all the residents and workers at Little Earth. Because our kids shouldn't have to fear and live in horror because they seen drive-bys and shootings happening at the park. Thank you.
Thank you. Daniel Corona, and then Cassandra Holmes, and then after that, Mackenzie Nolan.
I was talking to this. My name is Daniel Corona, and I'm a resident at Little Earth, and I'm on the Scout team, and I'm talking about culture appreciation. And one of the things I want to talk about is in like our community, there's a lot of kids for like, I don't know how to put it, for like our culture appreciation, like they want to follow our culture and do stuff, but they don't know how to do it, and there's no one there to show them. So like, I don't know how to put it. If there'd be more resources to like help them and show them what they can and what they're supposed to do, then yeah, they could do a lot more. That's it.
Good job.
Thank you. Cassandra Holmes, followed by Mackenzie Nolan, and then Jessica Rousseau.
So Buju, Niven Makwekwe, Indigenous Cause Makwadodam. My Anishinaabe name is Forebears Woman, but I'm also known as Cassandra Holmes. And I've talked to you all plenty of times, and I'm sure you're familiar. So one of the things that I do want to talk about and will continue to talk about with you all is the environmental racism, the environmental injustices that happens in the Little Earth and East Phillips community. The reason why I talk about that here as a public safety is because we are, like a lot of people said, acting as an intervention instead of a prevention. And what we need to recognize, and what I would like for you guys to recognize, is that if we can look at the long-term goal of what happens to people when they're in unhealthy environments, we suffer emotionally, physically, mentally, spiritually. And when we have unhealthy environments and suffer in those ways, we reach outside of our communities, because they're unhealthy. And one of the main places that we reach out to are hospitals, who will then push opioids on people for pain moderation or whatever pain control, or they'll reach out to drug dealers or the liquor stores. And if we can think about this in a public safety way, is that what's going to happen is we're going to be where we are now with this opioid crisis, with our people, our youth not knowing their way, not enough resources because we're tapping all our resources for this, and we're having a hard time focus on overall, and then we have homelessness. If we think about the long-term road of all this, it's going to lead to not only where we are in this crisis, but also Medicare We're going to have high expenses in the medical system because a lot of people are going to be having to reach out to them again for what initially caused their problems, or ODs, or going into the ambulance for whatever reason. And I do want to bring up the roof project depot, because that's right there, the roof depot site, that's right there in the East Phillips community, a block away from Little Earth. And the community plan there is so essential for what everyone's talking about, because we have aquaponics ideals, farming ideals, job opportunities, all green jobs, education and training, along with low-income housing. So all that taps into is what we need is opportunities in our community, not just money to do this and do that in short term. We need to think about the long term, and we want our community members to have pride in where they live and work where they live and be able to think about something long term. So I'm always going to talk to you guys about this, and I'm always going to hope that you can look at the long term solutions and ideas for our community and not just short term. Thank you.
Thank you. We have Mackenzie Nolan, followed by Jessica Rousseau, and then Mary Lagarde.
Good morning. Let me start by saying that it has been a real honor and a privilege to be a guest and a welcome body in the Little Earth community. There are many things that fall outside my scope and lived experience that I cannot speak to, and that will always be true. But today I speak from my journey working at Little Earth, where I started as a volunteer in my young teen years. And now 11 years later, I stand before you as a member of staff and an incredible leadership team at Little Earth Residents Association. I remember at one point being warned by a member of community, a non-resident of Little Earth, and I was told to carry mace with me at all times to be prepared when I exited a building until I got safely into my car and it was locked. And as a woman in today's society, there are always going to be necessary precautions, but I can attest that I have never had to do that. My point here is that we all, more often than not, fear and further marginalize or separate ourselves from what we don't know. In this case, it's your neighbors, Minneapolis residents, America's First Nations, in our very own backyard. I am here to press and make it clear that I look to you, Minneapolis Council. I know we all can do better. We have to do better. It is inexcusable to allow individuals' most basic human needs to go ignored. And as hard as it was to witness the encampment, or what folks called the Wall of Forgotten Natives, it was the soundest form of solidarity that I have witnessed as a call to action, bringing visibility to an issue so readily ignored across our nation. Tent City was home to hundreds of people around this time last year. It is these same individuals who line Bloomington Avenue at night, sleeping in dormways and park benches, individuals displaced from the Navigation Center closing, who are looking for food and water. As a society, we are now identifying that addiction is a real illness. Battling the opiate crisis is going to require our city and current administration to realize that this matter is affecting not only individuals, but their families and the community at large. Yes, Navigation the center was a start, and we can see that it will require much more attention and collaboration to find long-term solutions to this growing problem. I never thought I would live to see youth as young as 9 years old training adults in chest compressions and Narcan administration. But that is where we're at. We are serving and protecting all people from overdose. On behalf of the Scout Initiative, I will conclude by sharing that we have developed a strategic plan focused on violence prevention and public health disparities. It's led by an incredible team of residents and a team of safety champions that sit before you today. We are supported by a cross-sector team that includes members of the police department, city attorney's office, and crime analysts, and a team of researchers. We cannot continue to do this work in community without these developed partnerships, and in order for us to continue these efforts, we ask that the council make a monetary investment to our initiative, community, and the public health crisis. Thank you.
Thank you. Jessica Rousseau, followed by Mary Lagarde, and then Mike Gozi.
Hello and good morning. I'm Jessica Russo, and I'm the Executive Director at Little Earth Residents Association. I'd like to thank people who've come with me today to share their personal testaments, their personal experiences, to let you know what things look like, where they come from. You've gotten to bear firsthand witness to what trauma looks like. You've seen it in people up here sharing their stories, sharing their experiences, What we've done in our in Little Earth Residents Association is we've created programming around some of these concerns that we have. Scout, which is one of the programming efforts. What you may or may not have heard is we turn to each other for support on an individual level, family level, community level, Native agency level. We're looking for the city to understand that we need trauma-informed practice and culturally responsive resources in those Native agencies. One of the earlier meetings that I'm 2.5 months into this role. In the first week that I was in this position, a drive-by shooting had occurred at Cedar Park Field. I reached out to other Native agencies in this room to get support in place for not only my community members, but also my staff. My staff, my community, they have taken the lead on pushing matters through to help support, help push healing practices for the community. But I don't know if we've taken into consideration how much trauma they've been exposed to and are constantly re-exposed to. And I know we haven't, because the police department had said to us when we were working on strategic safety plans, what is needed is people in these entities to help deter or deflect the level of violence, again, without taking into consideration what impact that has on them in an individual level. I ignorantly even assumed when I had a 6-year-old who was exposed to this trauma, the drive-by, created some mental health support spaces for them. Their parents or caregivers are seeing something different. I had them literally in 2 rooms, separated by a window and a door. I did not realize when I said to the 6-year-old, Grandma's gonna be right over here. And I watched that little girl grab her grandmother with her arms so tightly because she couldn't be more than 3 feet away from her grandma. So we're doing what we can on our end. We need support, we need funding, we need to be intentional, we need long-term solutions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mary Lagarde, followed by Mike Gozi and Robert Lilligren.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the council. My name is Mary Lagarde, and I am the executive director of the Minneapolis American Indian Center. I'm also the vice chair of the Metropolitan Urban Indian Directors, or MUD, and also the president of the board for Little Earth of United Tribes Housing Corporation. So I'm here this morning to really talk to you about the urgency of the city investing in the recommendations that were set forth by the Opioid Task Force. So for about a year, I served on the mayor's multi-jurisdictional opioid task force. It's a long name. And I was the co-chair of the prevention subcommittee. And on April 4th of this year, I was able to participate in a press conference along with the mayor and Hennepin County Sheriff to unveil the recommendations of the task force. 5 days later, on April 9th, I got a late night phone call, and my 19-year-old little cousin had died of a heroin overdose at Little Earth, with her 1-year-old next to her. So I can't tell you how critical it is that the city invests in the recommendations of the opioid task force. It's critical right now. You know, I just can't stress how important that is. Replicating Next Step, that was one of the recommendations. We see the importance of that and being able to work with victims that have overdosed, that are looking for supportive services and having somebody that can advocate for them. Other recommendations were about supporting culture and supporting healing in our communities of color, which is vital. And replicating programs like the program at the Minneapolis American Indian Center, which is our Bright Beginnings program, working with moms who have given birth, who have recently given birth, that have a history of child protection and chemical dependency issues, so that they have advocacy, peer support, and cultural teachings. So these were just some of those recommendations that were made in the opioid task force. And we need the city to invest in those recommendations for the health and the safety of our community, and so that children like 1-year-old Malia doesn't have to grow up without a mother. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Mike Gozi, followed by Robert Lilligren, and then Chuck Turchik.
Good morning, Madam Chair and council members. Mike Gozi, I'm the CEO of American Indian Community Development Corporation. I presented to the clerk for your to look at a review of a proposal I have for AICDC Hygiene Service Area HSA Phase 2. We had the HSA last year at our property on Franklin Avenue. I have a property currently on the corner of 23rd and Bloomington. I live in South Minneapolis. I am 3210 18th Avenue South. I drive Bloomington Avenue every day, several times a day. The homeless people, the prostitution, and the despair on Bloomington Avenue has to be addressed. I believe that we have to meet people where they're at. They're on Bloomington Avenue, and so I present putting an HSA on Bloomington Avenue, so that we have a place where we can provide basic hygiene services and other services that are needed for this population. I believe that it's time for action versus reaction. I don't want to wait until December when you spend another $3 million on a 5-month plan, and we still had 50 people that were left out the door with no place to go. And so I think it's time that we are proactive versus reactive, that we put some investment into this community. It will only get worse. I have presented you with a white paper with a budget, and would like you to have some conversations in regards to that. It's sad that the city can't spend more effort in helping some of our communities really less fortunate. And yesterday, going down Bloomington Avenue, and every morning, there's people sleeping in the doorways of businesses. They should not have to go through that. There are needles all over, everywhere. We have 300 needle things we are going to distribute to at least get needles into safe boxes so that people can pick them up. I see the fire department, your city fire department, picking up needles on the street. It just doesn't seem like we are being wise as our resources in the needs of this community. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll have Robert Lilligren, followed by Chuck Turchik, and then Jeff Meehan.
Thank you, Madam Chair and committee members, and thank you for taking time to listen to the community today. And I really want to thank my relatives that have come down to share from their experience and their perspectives. It just means a lot. And since the Navigation Center closed, the issues that contributed to native homelessness, to addiction, to unsheltered homelessness in general, really haven't been addressed in a holistic way. And so the population that was living at the Navigation Center, around the Navigation Center, has really dispersed into the community. And so that's why we're seeing a real uptick in a lot of the issues you're hearing outlined today. And conversation is going on not just in the Native community, but in the broader community as well. And this organizing effort came in response to the most recent Metro Urban Indian Directors Safety Committee meeting. I chair Metro Urban Indian Directors. I'm also the CEO of the Native American Community Development Institute. And at the Safety Committee meeting, the community was very clear about the concerns, the safety concerns that are being generated by this uptick in unsheltered homelessness, open drug use, commercial sexual exploitation. And so we responded and organized this effort. We're here in a spirit of continued partnership, and we look forward to working toward long-term solutions, as Sharon Day referenced in her comments, but we also need help now. Earlier this year, the MUD leadership sent a letter to the City Council asking for a plan for when the Navigation Center closes. I know machinery of government moves slowly. I know that firsthand. I know that conversations are going on that will impact budgets to 2020 and beyond. But right now, we need some attention to some of these community issues that you're hearing about, the intersection of the many issues that contribute to the community concerns you're hearing about today. We'll take a comprehensive approach. It's not the City Council's role. The community has a role, other jurisdictions of government, philanthropy, service providers, but we need that city leadership to bring those people together. We don't have that ability or that authority in the community. We can build on lessons learned, as you're hearing in 2018 from the camp response, where the city did show that leadership and stepped forward to work with the community to define solutions. So we need these community-led, culturally specific solutions that really put healing at the center of our efforts. And you've heard about trauma today from a number of people, and when you're dealing with the populations that are overrepresented in our unsheltered homelessness and opioid-using community, Native Americans, African Americans, and others, it's going to take very specific, very surgical approaches to all of the communities and really all of the individuals that are experiencing these. And so MUD stands ready to be a good partner in the community. We will be inviting the City Council and the Mayor as well to a community meeting within the week, and you received our letter with our positions as well. So thank you, Chimigwech.
Thank you. We have Chuck Turchik.
Madam Chair, committee members, my name is Chuck Turchik. I live at 2112 Portland. 1 year and 7 days ago today, I raised an issue with city officials for the first time. And that issue was whatever happened to the recommendations that came out of the implementation committees for the federal report, the Federal Department of Justice, Office of Justice Programs Diagnostic Center's report that came out in January of 2015 that had to do with accountability procedures in the Minneapolis Police Department. Last week, I heard from the Office of Public Information, from John Elder, that the steering committee of those implementation committees had adopted the recommendations that came out of the 5 subcommittees of that process. That was a laughable claim, with all due respect to the short, bald fellow who's going to be addressing you later in this meeting. That was a laughable claim because the Minneapolis Police Department, in response to a data practices request I made, didn't even have some of the things that came out of those implementation committees. But if we accept the fact that the steering committee now in effect has adopted those recommendations, a week ago today I sent a letter to 14 city officials telling them that apparently these are the steering committee's recommendations. If any of you 14 officials would like to see copies of the recommendations that the steering committee had approved, please ask me for them. Some of them are available online, not all of them. Some are available from the Minneapolis Police Department, not all of them. So far, of those 14 public officials that I contacted, these are the people I have not heard back from requesting those recommendations. Mayor Jacob Fry, Police Conduct Oversight Commission Chair Andrea Brown, PCOC Commissioner Laura Westfall, PCOC Commissioner Caitlin Goki, PCOC Commissioner Afshin Farouzan, PCOC Commissioner Kate Bischoff, PCOC Commissioner Lacey Schumacher, PCOC Commissioner, Jeffrey Wade, Public Safety and Emergency Management Committee Chair, City Council Member Alondra Cano, PSEM Committee Member and Council Member Steve Fletcher, PSEM Committee Council Member Philippe Cunningham, PSEM Committee Council Member Jeremiah Ellison, PSEM Committee Council Member Linnea Palmisano, PSEM Committee Council Member Andrea Jenkins. None of the 14 people have asked for those recommendations, and they can't possibly have them.
Thank you, Mr. Turchik.
This is sad and pathetic.
Thank you for coming. Jeff Meehan is next, followed by Rich Thomasgard, and then Charmaine Wallstrom.
Good morning, Madam Chair and council members. My name is Jeff Meehan. I live at 221 First Avenue Northeast. I'm a director on Nicollet Island East Bank Neighborhood Association, and as such, I'm a liaison to the Minneapolis Police 2nd Precinct, which is headquartered up on Central Avenue. We, for many years in this neighborhood, have had the good fortune of having a police substation on University Avenue. For those of you who don't know, it's right across the street from Serdix. We have a full-time beat officer there Monday through Friday. This gentleman gets out and visits the businesses. He visits with the residents and so forth. Additionally, my residential organization works very closely with the Northeast Business Association, and the two groups are very involved in law enforcement issues. For several years now, we have had an annual Keep the Beat raffle, which actually funds extra patrols that we put on the street. We hire uniformed off-duty Minneapolis police to patrol our streets at the two highest activity times of the year. One of those patrols is going on right now in high summer, and the second one runs from Black Friday to New Year's. These officers from the 2nd Precinct go out, they go into the restaurants, they go into the parking lots, they go into the garages, they greet people. I've even seen one changing a tire for a visitor to the neighborhood. My point is, I think with the additional police that we have in our neighborhood speaks to the need that Minneapolis police overall needs to strengthen the force to 1,000 officers. We have, if not the lowest, one of the lowest crime rates in Minneapolis, and I firmly believe it's a result of the fact that we have a substation and that we have the extra officers. So I do support increasing the number of police officers. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Rich Thomasgard, and then Charmaine Wallstrom, followed by Matthew Robinson.
Good morning. My name is Rich Thomasgard, and I want to start off by saying I've been an over 40-year resident of the Twin Cities, and almost all of those 40-plus years I've lived and worked in South Minneapolis. And my main message is that I think the city needs more police officers. And I don't think that by any means is the solution to situations that we've been hearing about today. I really don't believe that, but I do believe that for situations where we need a police response, I think Minneapolis needs more officers. So more specifically, where I work is at the African Development Center, 1931 South 5th Street. So we're basically on Riverside Avenue between Augsburg College and Cedar Avenue. And we do small business loans, we do home ownership counseling, and we are very successful at doing that. And we have a parking lot that we are fortunate to be able to lease from the city, a 20-car parking lot. And unfortunately, that parking lot is the location for a lot of activity that is detrimental to what we're trying to do and what the tenants in our ADC Business Center are trying to do. And that activity is, drug-related activity. It's theft from cars. It's people coming into our office and stealing purses from my coworkers, stealing cell phones, and so the situation is that the police, I think are responding probably as quickly as they can to those incidents, but the response is oftentimes fairly slow. And the other thing is that I think that some of our neighbors, I've been told this, they don't even bother to call 911 because they believe that the response will be slow. They just don't think it's worth calling 911. And we all know that we should do that, but sometimes we don't. So we're challenged, I think, and I think there's a need for more officers, and I think in our specific area it relates to the fact that we're part of the 1st Precinct that covers downtown, and the density downtown obviously is high, but our neighborhood is probably one of the most densely populated neighborhoods in Minneapolis, and sometimes, I've been told by officers who've responded to incidents in our area that there's one officer that is at a certain time of the day that's available for our neighborhood, one officer for one of the most densely populated neighborhoods in Minneapolis. So that to me speaks to the need for more officers. So I think that's primarily what I wanted to say. There's also an issue of follow-up too. When we have incidents at our building, we're told that there will be a investigative follow-up, and that does not occur sometimes. So
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming. So we have Charmaine Wallstrom, followed by Matthew Robinson and Abdi Rizak Bihi.
Hi, my name is Charmaine Wallstrom, and I am from North Minneapolis. I'd like to read to you a post from just today. Some nights, the corner of North 11th and Knox Avenues in Minneapolis takes on the bustle of an open-air bazaar without a shopkeeper in sight. A car's radio blares old-school soul tunes well into the early morning, neighbors say. Fights are common, and drug dealers peddling marijuana and heroin don't bother hiding their transactions anymore. That is just kind of a slice of what's going on in North Minneapolis. I personally think that there are three areas that are the root of all of our problems, and that's just my perspective, but we need to address mental health issues, we need to address addiction, and we need to address getting jobs out there for people. One of the big concerns that I have is with the drug dealing that we have going on. I have property on West Broadway, a commercial property. It's really hard to get anybody to even come visit the property because West Broadway appears to be so dangerous. There's a lot of open-air drug dealing going on. At Cub Foods and at Winners, the gas station, try going up there to that tobacco shop to buy your menthol cigarettes. They're just standing there. They want to sell you your drugs. Nobody's there to talk to them. Now, when I go and I talk to the drug dealers, because I've gotten to know them from living in the community, they're my neighbors, right? They're my friends. Why are they dealing drugs? Because they don't have a job. They need jobs. So if we could get more jobs in the community, these people aren't going to be out there dealing the drugs. Also, when people come out of treatment, what's the best way for them to get money? Selling drugs. I work in recovery with people. I've been sponsoring women and in recovery, and it's so hard for them to stay clean because they come out and they need money. They need money right away. They can't get a job. So what do? They go back to either prostituting or selling drugs. We need to get jobs out there to people. Another big concern I have is with the shots fired. According to the maps, starting from January 1st until today, we've only had 9 days of no shots fired in North Minneapolis. I think something needs to be done to address the shots fired. We have children experiencing daily trauma from shots fired in their community. And I encourage all of you to read the book, The Body Holds the Score. And what it will tell you is that these children, as well as adults, are growing up and they're holding within their body the trauma of having the shots fired. They're going to grow up and they're just going to have troubled lives unless we get to addressing this issue. Also, I have bullet holes in my property, shots fired. People just drive by, they just start shooting the bullets. What can be done to stop the shots fired? I do not know the answer, but I trust Arredondo. I trust people like Lisa Clemens. I think we need to provide more resources to help those people so they can do their job.
Thank you. Matthew Robinson, followed by Abdi Rizak Bihi, and then Ambrose Russell.
So Matthew Robinson, and I'll just be real brief. I'm here to support the Minneapolis Police Department and as they receive additional funding to perform the duties they perform on a daily basis. I'm not asking for more arrests, but more resources to help with the community relations building. I thank the men and women of Minneapolis Police Department every day. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Abdi Rizak Bihi. I want to thank the leaders from my community, Ayan, and our safety specialist, Carla, and the gentleman from ADC, and I agree with them. And I also thank my partner from the north side, Lisa. Few weeks ago, we called the police in Cedar Riverside. I live in Cedar Riverside for the past 24 years, and I work there. And I love that neighborhood, and contrary to the media, sometimes negative stuff, it's peaceful. I have 2 children who were born there, and I'm not moving anywhere. And the reason is because we're all active, and we all work together. And a few weeks ago, we had, like any other summer, we have few East African kids from the suburbs that really contribute 90% of our crime. They come to the neighborhood. They don't come to say hello to their grandparents, but they bother us. And these kids were driving around, hitting all the cars, most of the cars on the street, and we called the police. We waited for an hour. And when the police came, it was very young officers from MPD. Actually, they stick their guns on us, on me. Guess what? I was not pissed. I was not angry. And I did not say this before today. And the reason was I knew MPD is short of funding, of training of those young police officers. We are short of police officers that can keep us safe. We support Adando. I worked with Chief Adando 20 years ago, and actually he was the one when we had issues with MPD after September 11, bad issues, who advised me to be part of the MPD and organize Somali American officers to be the part of the force. It was his idea, and it solved a lot of problems, and it became a national pilot program that was featured in Washington Post and all over the world. I urge you to support this chief. He's got great ideas. We want our officers to be culturally competitive. We don't want them to show up and stick their guns on us because they've been working 18 hours or 19 hours a day. I think our safety depends on for the police officers. We are pro-police. We want them to come not to arrest us and harass us, but to serve us and protect us. We have so many issues, people who visit our neighborhood, see the Riverside, that they contribute not only trash, but also something against our safety. So we want to see officers that we see sometimes on Cedar Avenue, on Riverside Avenue. We have respect for them. We want them. We're not saying we hate them. Please fund our department. Thank you.
Thank you. We have Ambrose Russell? Ambrose? No? Okay, Autumn Dilly? Autumn? And then after that we have Williamette Morrison.
Hello, my relatives. I come to you today as a community member, as a outreach worker for homeless Native Americans, and then also as a relative. Yesterday, my partner and I walked up and down Bloomington Avenue and picked up needles. I want you to see that this is a visual representation of a problem. This is all picked up on yesterday's shift, which was a 4-hour shift. We spoke to 24 unsheltered Native Americans, and we picked up 60 plus needles. The honest to God truth about what's going on is our relatives are dying, and they're dying right in front of us. We see them every single day. They are sleeping, they are overdosing, they have nowhere to go, they have nowhere to rest. The things that I would like to bring up is that basic needs being met is a human right. It is not a privilege. Access to facilities. Nowhere on Bloomington Avenue are they allowed to use public restrooms. That means that they're going to be defecating on the ground. They're going to be using the bathroom in your backyard. And that's the truth. Hygiene supplies. I talked to a young lady yesterday who needed hygiene supplies to take care of herself on her time. I know that's uncomfortable to say, it's uncomfortable to hear. Think about how uncomfortable it is to be that young lady on the street. We have no access to affordable housing. We have all of these people that are coming in that are housing case managers, housing this, housing in their title, but we don't have enough housing, point blank, period. Access to health care. There are so many bloodborne illnesses right now that are being passed around because we have needles laying on the ground. These needles are bent They're sticking straight up. Our babies walk through this. I watched a 12-year-old girl yesterday put her brother on her back to walk through Little Earth because she was afraid that because he had flip-flops on that he would step on a needle. Triage to recovery solutions, and I say recovery solutions because that for us is sweat lodge, that is ceremony, that is treatment, that is long-term treatment. I don't believe that we're going to cure an opiate crisis with 30 days of treatment. We need long-term solutions. And we also need more people engaging on Bloomington Avenue. Yesterday, I received an email saying that outreach teams were pulling their outreach team from working on Bloomington Avenue because it was too dangerous. Hopefully, this got my point across. I'm running out of time. Thank you. Matakayase.
Thank you. William Metz, followed by Christine O'Neill.
Sorry. My name is Williamette Morrison. I didn't plan to attend your meeting this morning, but I appreciate being given the opportunity to present to you. I lived in Little Earth years ago. I'm a former Minneapolis resident for 20 years, and I recently moved in 2005 up to my home reservation up on the Red Lake Band of Chippewa Indians. Okay, and I know all the issues, homelessness. Our people, our Native people have basically become refugees in our own home country. Our people should be eligible to receive the refugee funding that is taking over all our Native housing facilities, such as Many Rivers Apartments, the Somalian community, no offense, or I'm not trying to disrespect anybody, but they've taken over many of our housing units that were built out of Native American homeless numbers. And so I've been trying to discuss this with the mayor, and I have not ever been able to get a response in any way. So this is an ongoing issue. I also am standing before you to please look into your government documents that orders you and your different levels of governments to separate our families, break up our family units, the Native Americans. Those are direct orders from the government, and many people have been threatened their job securities if they disclose that those orders were coming on the various levels of government. And being Native American on my home reservation, I was pulled over by a police officer and told that I had been marked the top #1 suspect on our reservation. And what that meant was any crime that was committed, any call that came through, I was the first one to be investigated. And so he told me that nothing ever traced back to me and that he would take my name off that top of the suspect list. So I have full faith that these Minneapolis police officers ride along with names like that too to harass. So I'd like to please ask you to dispose of all your threatening behaviors, your recommendations to kill our people or incarcerate us at will. Miigwech, thank you.
Thank you. We have Christine O'Neill, followed by Tony Marchuk.
Good morning, I'm Christine O'Neill, and I have lived in the Victory neighborhood for over 25 years. I support Chief Arredondo's request for adequate resources for community outreach to shorten response times for many of the reasons that speakers here have so passionately expressed. In particular, I believe we need the resources to staff a traffic enforcement department, along with other I live in the Victory neighborhood, as I said, and in the past few months, I've experienced several instances of reckless speeding and passing on neighborhood streets, Lowry Avenue, Penn Avenue, and Dowling. These cars are going at least 50 miles an hour, and it's frightening. Also, I often see cars going through red lights at the Penn and Dowling intersection. At a recent Victory neighborhood community meeting where we discussed traffic issues, many other residents complained about similar experiences and expressed concern about the safety of children and pedestrians. Speeding on Osseo Road coming from Brooklyn Center into Minneapolis has been a long-time complaint of Victory residents. There was also a lot of frustration expressed about the very slow response times to 911 calls due to the overload of calls. Thank you.
Thank you. Tony?
Chairperson, council members, my name is Tony Romarsik. I live in Minneapolis, in downtown and downtown adjacent. My family and I have over 24 businesses, properties, and buildings. Last year, the city reduced the police budget by $1 million and diverted that fund to community services. I applaud those community groups. I think they're vitally important, but I think it's also not a zero-sum game. I don't think you have to divert it from the police department to increase county services. One of those services, which accounts for almost half of that $1 million, is the Office of Violence Prevention, which 1 year later still has no stated goal or objective to it. We're not moving very fast on those services. We need more mental health services. Downtown, we need police training to deal with those services. 911 is the mental health call of necessity for people. We need to have specialists that can ride along with police, and that means an increased budget and more officers. The homeless is increasing, and person in crisis calls are the third most time-costing calls that the police make. Those calls are up 1/3 in just 5 years, and they're not going to be going down. We spend more money on jail than on police, and that is completely backwards. We need more police to prevent crimes, to keep people from getting into jail. Every weekend downtown, they have shift holdovers where the daytime police are required to work the nighttime police because they're understaffed. It results in tired officers. I imagine some of them have to be resentful. Perhaps some of them are pleased to get a little overtime, which is hugely inefficient. It leaves them overstretched and unorganized because they're coming into a situation without knowing what the plan is. Foot patrols downtown, just like we spoke in Northeast Minneapolis, where we had a restaurant business as well, hugely advantageous. We got to know the police officers. Officers from other areas came in to see what was going on, walked through with them. It was a process that really helped increase community trust. I hope that we do increase the budget and hire more officers. Thank you very much.
Thank you for coming. Lisa Clemens, followed by Chris Hewitt and Saiji Eicher.
So I did mine in notes, so I hope I can make it through it in 3 minutes. You always ask about community-based initiatives to reduce the violence in the community. So a group of community people came together and created a flyer about the traffic safety issues in North Minneapolis, and I think it should spread south. I'm curious to know why these can't be put in squad cars and handed out by officers on minor traffic stops. It should be safety over dollars anytime we can do that. We give fix-it tickets out. I don't understand why we can't give a flyer out. I want to thank Councilman Cunningham for stepping up on the traffic issues that we're having in our community, and he and I hardly ever agree, but that's my guy right now. Most of you ran on police reform, but you ignored community reform when you did your speeches to be elected. We have always had great leadership in the city of Minneapolis, but we have always been reactive versus proactive. So I want to thank Inspector Polfus. When we did call him in about the traffic issues. I don't know how many cars you have to see flipped over before you understand that's a problem. He decided to put some cars out to just do traffic and answer those 911 calls. I'm sorry, 311 calls. But he can't be consistent with it. And here's why. When you have a shooting in the city of Minneapolis, you all know this now, especially North Minneapolis, you take all your cars off the street, and they already don't have enough cars on the street. So then you have to pull resources from another precinct to answer calls in there. That accounts for a lot of your slow response times on your calls, because we have a lot of shootings, which we all know. Same would apply to downtown, Mr. Fletcher. When we talk about the drug dealers, I'll push back on that a little bit. It's lucrative, and it's unchecked. So when they're out there dealing, they don't all want a job. We have offered that service as a Mother's Love, Mad Dads, and all other organizations in the community. So it's lucrative and unchecked. Every time we ask for more squads, we get the pushback from you guys saying you can't police your way out of this. That's not what we're asking. We're asking for them to do their basic jobs, and there's not enough police out there to do that. So I stand with Chief Arredondo on that and Deputy Chief Knight. I want to thank everybody that came in to talk about the gun violence in the community. When you talk about trauma, listening to shots fired every single night, that is trauma. When your kids can't walk to school because they're up early in the morning shooting, that's trauma. And I don't understand why we just can't see it. Most of the guns that are recovered in the city are recovered in North Minneapolis. Their numbers match all of the precincts combined. That's a problem. We've ignored our most vulnerable. The only reason we're talking about Broadway, forgive me just one sec, the only reason we're talking about the vulnerable people on Broadway is because a white man ran over black bodies on Broadway. They've been out there pimping our girls, the black males selling dope to them. We've had to save 2 lives with Narcan in those very bus stations. So I want to understand why we want to choose to ignore that. In your district, 11th and Knox, they give blowjobs for drugs. On West Broadway, they give blowjobs for drugs.
Thank you,
I
Ms.
just wanted
Clemens.
to say it.
Chris Hewitt, followed by Saiji, and then Kim Danaker. Mr. Hewitt.
Good morning. I'm here to stress the community's support for the reestablishment of the Traffic Enforcement Division and are looking for your support as well. Since the dissolution of the dissolving of the division, offenses have gone through the roof, and frankly, the streets are almost too dangerous to be on sometimes. 2012, Allstate ranked Minneapolis as 57th out of 200 cities in the country. This ranking dealt with accidents and those without insurance and other criteria. Since that time, in 2019, we are now ranked 137 out of 200 cities. Other cities across the country have done things like dissolve their traffic divisions, and they've all had similar issues. We're seeing a lot of those cities now bringing back those traffic enforcement divisions. Cities that have done this have also seen their DUIs and those kind of offenses not being pulled over as much, therefore the streets are less safe with more drunk drivers on the roads. And obviously coming up, we're going to have a new cell phone law go into effect, and I'm not sure how that's even going to happen around here if we don't have a traffic enforcement division to take care of those things. It's kind of interesting because over a 3-week period in June, my family and I were almost involved in about 4 different instances. I almost got T-boned twice as people blow stop signs. My wife was almost in a major car accident on Penn and Dowling as 2 other drivers decided to do illegal maneuvers and had an accident literally right in front of her of a serious nature. I went out walking my dogs one morning and a car blew through a stop sign on a residential road doing about 50, and I had to take my dogs and yank them back and jump back onto the sidewalk. And this is just typical of what happens on a daily basis. Last week, my best friend had a bike accident over on Lowry and 2nd as a car hit him. And he's still dealing with some of the consequences because of that. And that driver had no driver's license and no car insurance. So everything is on my friend now. So what we're asking for is a base level of services. Right now, we feel that right now that's not happening. And so, along with some of the recommendations of Chief Rondo and et cetera, it'd be very important, I think, to get back to basics, get a base level of services with some traffic enforcement so that we can keep our streets safer. And actually, the studies show that crime actually also goes down in relation to traffic enforcement. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. Saiji, followed by Kim, Daniker, and then Gary Spears.
Good morning, council members and community. My name's Seiji, and I'm here as a part of the Reclaim the Block coalition to say that the violence and health crises that people have spoken into this room today are real, but historically, continuing to hire more and more police officers has not solved these problems. If we want our city to be safer, we need to be clearer about their root causes and more creative about solutions. When someone's having a mental health crisis, it should be trained mental health professionals who show up on the scene, not armed police. If we don't learn this lesson, we will keep learning the names of community members killed by MPD while they're in crisis, like Travis Jordan last fall. When summer comes and gun violence increases, it's a sign that initiatives like group violence intervention need our resources. Since 2017, GVI has worked with 150 people at risk of being involved with gun violence, and only 7 of those people have been rearrested on a gun charge. When overdoses skyrocket, like they did earlier this summer, it's time to invest in organizations who train community members to use naloxone and who share critical information about using drugs safely for people in our community who are at risk of overdose. When people who don't have housing experience violence, health crises, or profiling, we should double down on affordable housing and resources to get them into housing, not enforcement actions against poor people. Last year, the council called for a new 911 MPD work group. This group is exploring whether the city can respond to certain types of 911 calls with resources outside the police department. This group has yet to meet, and their findings should be at the center of this discussion. If police are stretched, let's explore who else in our community is ready and willing to take on some of these emergency roles and give them the resources they need. Let's not double down on the old model at the same time as we're working to breathe life into a new one. There's no shortage of urgent issues of safety and community well-being that come up in Minneapolis, but real safety requires the right tool for every job. When we hear about a problem in our city and immediately call for MPD to hire more police, we're calling for more hammers and assuming that every problem is a nail. Let's diversify our toolbox.
Thank you. Kim Daniker, followed by Gary Spears, and then Tony Romarchik.
My name is actually Kim Milliard, but I'm not used to being married yet, and so I wrote my maiden name on the thing, so I apologize for that. I agree with the speaker from Reclaim the Block just now, and I'm going to try to get through all of this. It's not in order, you guys. I just found out about this meeting yesterday. I guess the main thing I want to say is that while I don't know if Chief Arredondo put this report together himself or if he had people in his office help him with it, it's a really well put together document. Unfortunately, and if this were all I knew, I would say, yeah, more cops. But unfortunately, the research is actually conflicted and doesn't show that there's a clear causal relationship between more police and less crime. And as people, community members have been saying, there's a lot of trauma in our community that causes. It causes a lot of things to come out. There's mental health issues. Affordable housing is in crisis right now. Homelessness. People need jobs. They need opportunities. We need all these other things. And so when we view police, like at the point, so say I am attacked and I've had violent crime happen to me. By the time I call the police to come out and deal with that, the crime has already taken place. The assault has already happened. The trauma has already been inflicted. And so the police are a reactive force. They're not preventing things. I wish I had the data, but like I said yesterday, I read something a while back that police had at one point increased their patrols on Bloomington Avenue in South Minneapolis to deal with some of the drug issues that were going on there. And all that happened was they reduced some of the drug issues on Bloomington and it moved over to 15th Avenue South. And so you can sit here and say, well, police decreased crime in this area. No, they just shifted it to another area because policing doesn't get at the root issues that cause people to commit violent crimes, which are things like mental health, which are things like not having not just jobs, but jobs that afford a decent standard of living. Having more police doesn't deal with the fact that people get out of prison and they offend on a repeated basis. So I would just say yes to that task force that's going to be looking at the 911 calls and coming up with a list of what are the nature of the calls, what other resources can we send out, and should we be budgeting for besides just more police officers? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Gary Spears, followed by Eduardo Barrera, and the last one here is maybe Jeff Behan.
Bonjour, Magizi and Jenikaz Ajak and Dundam. My Ojibwe name is Bald Eagle, and I come from the Crane Clan. My name is Gary Spears, and I work for the center school. I'm the security safety coordinator there. I've also worked in the Phillips community for almost 8 years. My concerns today here in the community there is in the spring of 2019, when I started working at center school, I've seen 8 different incidents where we had our young female students, maybe 14, 15, and 16 years old, being harassed by sex traffickers, followed over by the Speedway near 24th and 21st in Bloomington, or 24th in Bloomington, as they approach school. I don't see I see a lack of police force when I call. A response time takes too long. We need an officer out there, and to be really specific about what I'm asking is that between the hours of 8 a.m. to 1 p.m. we need a patrol car and officer close by the school to respond quickly. They're never on foot, the sex traffickers. They're in a car, and they come from all types of incomes and all races. They are looking to sex traffic the young Native students there that come to our school. They need to be safe. And there are also, some of them have come pretty bold in situations where we have our garden on 24th and 21st in Bloomington there. And they've come out there even hidden with their stolen plates when I've risked my own life to come out and confront them, the sex traffickers in their vehicle. To leave. The police found out later that the car did not match the plates, so they're also planning with plans to take more than just taking down the plates. They've also concealed their own identity of the vehicles. We have the spring semester coming soon. I hope the officers can help us, and we also have fall, and we also end with summer school and July 12th is the end of our school year, but we really need them during the times of 8 a.m. to 1 p.m. We need an officer there. They're looking to solicit and sex traffic the young Native girls there that come to our school, our students. Also, we need the 3rd Precinct to be aware that we do have a school there, center school there. We had an incident in spring of 2019 where the officer arrested somebody and they're looking for a gun, and they asked us, what is the building there? And we said, this is a school. They were unaware that we have a school there in the 3rd Precinct. I also do have a big homeless problem, and we have hundreds of heroin needles in our alleyways and throughout the neighborhood. Miigwech, Bizadao, thank you for listening to me today.
Thank you for coming. Eduardo, is Mr. Barrera still here? Nope. Okay. Is it Jeff?
It is.
Okay, thank you.
Chair and Council, Jeff Behan, the Security Director for Target Field, and compelled today to speak to you as a retired law enforcement officer of 39 years, chief of 2 suburban agencies here in Hennepin County. I've been on the Hennepin County Justice Initiative programs for many of that time. One of the cities I worked in, although scope and scale was smaller than here, we had the 6th and 7th highest Part 1 and Part 2 crime rates in all of Hennepin County. work closely with your city attorney's office and others on diversion programs and readjustment of responses to opioid addictions and everything else. It's an honor to speak before such a prestigious audience who has certainly come to you today with one of your most difficult tasks. You have to balance the city budget and respond to their hue and cry of their emotional responses to you today. Some of those are social service issues, some of those are criminal justice issues. What I'm here to say as a chief in 2 different agencies and a graduate of the Northwestern School of Police Staff and Command in Evanston, Illinois, you need to listen to your experts. You need to listen to your chief and others who are doing a phenomenal job, but are inadequately falling short of what they need to do. I would encourage you as a chief, a former chief, to look at your queuing times. We obviously have some very serious concerns in downtown Minneapolis with quality of life issues and crimes that are occurring adjacent to and near Hennepin Avenue and Target Field. And in order for you to respond to all of these citizens' requests here, you need to have your officers to have more available queue time. As a chief, I believe that my officers should have about 1/3 of their shift should be available to be involved and engaged in community policing projects. Your officers are reactive. They come to work, they're behind on calls, they leave work, they're still behind on calls. And I think the answer is not enforcement, it's not more cops, more guns, more bullets on the street. It's having in an 8-hour shift, a 10-hour shift, a 12-hour shift, whatever it might be, the availability for these officers to have free time to get out of their vehicles, to be engaged in the reservation and other locations in your city that need their attention. So I come to you just very briefly as a retired law enforcement practitioner to say that there is a need to increase the number of officers here. I would call your chief and his associates my friends, my peers, and I'm not here today to speak on their behalf. I wasn't asked to do that, but as I sat and listened to this conversation today, I felt compelled to come here and tell you, listen to PERF, listen to the experts, listen to those that can advise your city and move forward in the right direction. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And that is the end of the folks who have registered to speak. So thank you very much, everybody, for taking time out of your day during the workday to come address our committee. Without further folks in line, we are going to go ahead and receive and file the public comments from today. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. And now we have 2 consent items. So we have a contract with John Gore Theatrical Group, Inc. for the bomb detection at the Orpheum State and Pantages Theaters. And then we also have a contract with the University of Minnesota Veterinary Medical Center for Police Canine Health Services. All those in favor of approving the consent items, please say aye. Aye. And now we will move on to our discussion, which is item number 4, a presentation by the Minneapolis Police Department relating to some of the issues that we heard this morning. As the chair of the Public Safety Committee, I've been receiving a lot of complaints from the community about some of the ways that our police department is working or not working. And so in order to save us time in sending 1,000 emails about these issues, I wanted to have a presentation by our chief, our police chief, Madaria Arredondo, to please address the committee and inform us on what's going on, why, what are the root causes of some of these challenges that we're hearing. We heard about some of those this morning. And just for context, this morning's public comments is just for the council to sit here quietly and receive those comments, to take them in and to integrate them into our work. It's not to get into a debate with community members or to respond to any specific issue, although I will note that we did call leadership to be a part of this public comment period so that they could take notes, that they could follow up with people specifically. And so we have here our Chief Freudel from Fire. We also have members of the Health Department who are in charge of the opioid response and needle pickup work that is ramping up at the city. I do hope that our partners at the county are listening and engaging with this very important conversation, as there are resources currently in their purview that can be deployed and should be deployed to this conversation. It's not up to the city alone to shoulder the burden of fixing some of these problems. So with that, I will go ahead and let you take it over and walk us through your discussion.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Good morning, Madam Chair, committee members. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to come before you today to discuss this very important conversation and information about MPD staffing. I am here before you today as Chief of Police with the charge and mandate for providing for the public safety of our great city's 400,000 plus residents, workers, and visitors, to say to you that we are at a critical time within the MPD, and because our staffing needs have not been properly addressed over many years, it has resulted in our current MPD resources being strained to capacity, and quite frankly, we are hemorrhaging. Now, I'm not blaming this council or even previous police administrations. The MPD resource staffing model has been broken, quite frankly, for decades. The old broken model is rooted in a cap of resources, while at the same time taking on more community needs, overlooking the continual increases in our city's population, while we continue to experience never-before-seen rises in shootings, domestic assaults, drug epidemics, and surging homelessness. If we continue with the same broken model, my work for transformational change of the MPD, shifting the culture, providing for the health, wellness, and mindfulness of its employees, and ultimately creating a police department in which those we serve will come to see us as both trusting and legitimate guardians of their communities, will be at great risk of failing. The stakes of our city's safety is too high, and failure is not an option for me as your chief. I deeply appreciate, Madam Chair and committee members, you for allowing me to present this important staffing and resource information before you today and our public. And I want to provide you with a truly accurate assessment of where we are today, void of emotion, but wanting to get an understanding of how this impacts all of us. And with that, Madam Chair, committee members, I'd like to proceed. As I noted, I think it's important for context to talk about and at least get an example of where our population in our great city has grown just over the past decade. As we see, 45,905 people were added to our great city since 2010. In Minneapolis, the city here in the state exhibited the greatest growth of all of our cities in the state. So what does our MPD staffing as currently today look like? 888 sworn employees, and I want to make the distinguish employees, because too oftentimes when we hear the number 888, many in our community believe that is 888 911 responders. That is not accurate. The 888 includes myself, our leadership teams, our detectives, our inspectors, lieutenants, but the real focus I want to address today is our officers, those men and women who, when someone picks up the phone to call 911, they'll respond to them. We see 612 of our 911 responders there. So, total sworn of patrol, we have 5 precincts, and for a historical context, I think it's important to note that it wasn't until the mid-90s that the Minneapolis Police Department served 4 precincts throughout our great city. When we created the first precinct, we had to pull officers from the other 4 precincts. So we've been continuing working at a deficit. Those extra 120 officers did not just fall to us. We had to take from those other 4 precincts. So of the current sworn patrol officers, the current patrol sworn in our precincts, our 5 precincts, you can see here, first precinct at 123, second precinct at 92, third precinct at 128, fourth precinct at 129, and fifth precinct at 111. And again, I want to point out that those numbers indicate everyone from the precinct inspector to their property crimes detectives, their CERT team officers, and those are individuals who do not respond to 911 calls. So, for the brevity of this presentation, I know we had some very important discussions and comments earlier from our public. I'm focusing on just a couple of precincts today, but I want Madam Chair and committee members to know that the staffing challenges I'll speak to today represent every precinct in our city, but I'm going to focus on just a couple. The third precinct as it currently is today in terms of staffing, we have an inspector, 4 lieutenants, 16 sergeants, and 105 officers. For those who aren't familiar with the shifts over at the third precinct, They have a day shift, which comprises of 27 officers, and that day shift is from 6:30 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. They have a mid shift of 28 officers, working from 4 p.m. to 2 a.m., and a night shift, working from 8:30 p.m. to 6:30 a.m. So how does that third precinct look like in terms of average day staffing? The day shift has 10 officers on average working. The mid shift has 11 officers on average working. And the night shift, 8 officers. Some may look at the green bar, and those are officers are scheduled off. We obviously have to make sure that we allow for our officers to have time off. There's other factors that will include vacation time, training. But on average, those are the number of officers that are working the day, mid, and night shifts at the third precinct. I should also just make a point, in the red bars, that does not include if officers, if something comes up with an officer or their family, if they call in, that number could be reduced as well. So this year, we operate on a 28-day staffing schedule. So a snapshot of that, from May 26th of this year to June 22nd, those third precinct shifts, those ones highlighted in the red bars, they responded to 4,219 911 calls. That does not include their self-initiated activity. Self-initiated activity could include officers late at night seeing a person going into a business window that has been closed. They have to respond to those things as well. But those officers responded to 4,219 911 calls. From a safety perspective and from a officer operational efficiency perspective, we do our best, and as chief, I try to make sure that we have a 2-person squad cars. So, if the third precinct, if every single officer, the 27 assigned to the third precinct night shift, were working, you see the geographical map of third precinct. That is what it would look like if all officers were working. This next map is what it looks like on the average. If an officer or incident, major incident happens in the third precinct, we can say a shooting, for example, or homicide, or a robbery of business in progress, that will absolutely drain the resources of that third precinct like that. So just to look at, again, over a few years of the 911 calls, and this is citywide, that our officers respond to, as well as those self-initiated calls, you can see in 2015, averaged over 200,000 self-initiated calls, over 100,000 911 calls, and that number and those averages tend to really repeat itself from 2015 all the way to 2018. Now, I understand that it's very important, and me as chief, I recognize that public safety is just beyond policing, and we are very fortunate in our city that we have so many community outreach groups that are helping us in a lot of these social issues. There were comments made earlier from the public, which I truly appreciate, about what are we doing to better prepare for our young men who are, particularly our young men who are coming out of prisons, and I absolutely go out and speak into our prisons to try to listen and learn what they need. If you would have told me 5 years ago that I'd be standing before you as chief, and one of the things that I'd be championing is the role that housing plays, or homelessness in our society, and the impacts that has on our communities. It does, and I will continue to champion the right that folks need to have adequate, proper shelter and housing. What these 5 most time-consuming calls, though, I wanted to point out, is these are calls in which community members, we would not have them go in first, because it requires a police response. Those are assaults, domestics with weapons, abuses in progress, persons who are experiencing crisis, traffic accidents, and shootings. Over the past 5 years, if you look at this particular slide, the far right-hand side slide talks about the 5-year % change in calls for service. Those are individuals in our community who are calling 911 to get a response for assaults, domestics, persons in crisis, motor vehicle accidents, and shootings. the number of people who have called in, we can see that there were decreases in the assault and domestics. However, we saw an increase of 31% in persons in crisis, a 6.5% drop in the motor vehicle accidents, but a 2% drop in those folks calling in shootings. However, the number or the amount of time our officers are spending on these calls, we see a 50% increase in our officers responding to persons in crisis. Motor vehicle accidents has increased almost 8%, and shootings over 28%. For the Minneapolis Police Department, when we talk about staffing, we do have yearly attrition. Attrition are those officers that are going to retire or resign from the department, and those numbers are not replaced. The average for the last 4 years, from 2015 to 18, we averaged 40 officers that we lose to attrition. Over the last 3 years, that has been 42. So it's important because I don't want folks to just think that I am someone that believes in over-policing. I think that policing is just one aspect of public safety, but certainly community outreach and working together on both mutual and community collaborations are so very important. But I also don't want to dismiss research that is out there. And some of the research that is out there are that more community-connected officers walking on foot in their neighborhoods is likely to deter crime and reduce the number of arrests. It's also likely to reduce excessive use of force by police officers. As police agencies continue to squeeze staffing challenges or be squeezed by staffing challenges and faced with them, tight budgets and recovering labor market, the need for more peace officers becomes paramount. And I do believe that appropriate resources does improve community safety while helping to serve and build that trust with those we serve. And this is why appropriate resources become so vital in the transformational work that I am focused on as chief. So, just some of the research that is out there shows that an increase in police presence leads to a statistically and economically significant decrease in the level of crime, and studies have shown that crimes drop when more officers are hired. As chief, I do not want the MPD to contribute to the hopelessness or increasing the populations of our prisons. And as I mentioned before, I do speak at our local prisons and do everything that I can to try to prevent our young men, particularly young brown and black men, from entering prisons to begin with. However, the United States is very unusual in spending much more money on our prison systems than our police departments. More police can equal fewer prisons and less crime. Uniform officers patrolling the streets, stopping crime before it starts, rather than making numerous arrests that send more individuals to prison, seems like a likely goal. When the Obama-era COPS funding, federal funding, was available, the data showed then that those agencies that made the cut ended up with police staffing levels that were 3.2% higher, and that crime levels were actually decreased by 3.5%. And reductions in crime seem to be about proportional to increases in the size of police forces. Another study, by looking at a large set of police and crime data for mid-sized to large cities from the 1960s to 2010, it concluded that for every dollar spent on extra policing, it generated about $1.63 in social benefits, primarily for reducing the number of murders. Many in our community have told me since my time as chief, and certainly they expressed it here today, and I believe that response times does impact trust. Adequate staffing will improve response times, which will build that trust, which again will aid us in building more positive relationships with those we serve. If there is a slide that I could absolutely have full emphasis on, it is probably this one during my presentation. Over the past year, our MECC dispatchers have had to notify supervisors out there, and this is citywide, in the precincts. A priority one call is a call that would involve assaults in progress, domestics, shootings, burglaries in progress, and overdoses. Over the past year, our MECC dispatchers have had to notify our patrol supervisors of a priority one call and we could not send a squad. That happened 1,251 times. This is unacceptable to me as chief, and I know for all of you as well. But I also want to take a moment to say the emotional toll that those calls take on my officers, my men and women, when they hear that over the radio, that a person is breaking into their home, or that their mother is being assaulted, or that there's a robbery in progress and they cannot get there. We must do better, and I believe we can do better. I want to just reflect on that again. Within the past year, when an individual in our community called 911 for a priority 1 call over 1,200 times, we did not have a squad available to respond to them. Each pending call has the potential to erode the public trust. Study out of New York City, all of the anti-crime impact, in other words, came from putting more cops on foot in neighborhoods rather than aggressive tactics. As I'm your chief, as I'm trying to transform and change the culture of this police department, we will not be a racially profiling, aggressive, dehumanizing, and disrespecting our community. We will not be that. But we do need resources. There's at least some evidence that increased staffing levels would also reduce the number of excessive force complaints. Now, the next information many of you are aware of, and the tolls of fatigue and what that does to the men and women who are out here serving. Fatigue does matter. Tired officers across a variety of studies generate more complaints from civilians they interact with. There's many studies out here that talks about sleep deprivation and how that physiologically plays on the human body, and to the equivalent of folks being having taken alcohol, and how it increases the less sleep you have. It increases it has the effects of increasing your blood alcohol content as if you were drinking. After 17 to 19 hours without sleep, performance was equivalent or worse than that of a blood alcohol concentration level of 0.05. And after longer periods without sleep, performance reached levels equivalent to a BAC of 0.10. Kings County Sheriff's Department did a study. Working a single hour of overtime led to a 2.7% increase in the odds that an officer would be involved in a use of force incident the following week. Study out of Phoenix, being assigned to a 13-hour rather than a 10-hour shift led to increases in fatigue and Professional Standards Bureau complaints. Another study, working back-to-back nights increased the odds of public complaints, and that the effect is particularly large when the officers had to make court appearances in the daytime between working the night shifts. Switching over to our first precinct, downtown. Just this year alone, from January to June 30th, the first precinct men and women on the mid-shift were held over every weekend except but one Friday and every Saturday, but one Friday and one Saturday. Those men and women work a 10-hour shift. They deserve to go home to their families after that 10 hours, to decompress, to exhale, to recoup, and be well and ready to serve our community the next day. They can't. When a supervisor holds those officers over, it is because of safety, and they do not have the resources to adequately manage the volume of calls and the situations that are occurring. I want to keep that in perspective again. Our mid-shift officers could not go home. From January of this year to late June, they were held over, and the next slide will indicate, 262 times. As I'm trying to, again, care for the well-being of our officers and their health and wellness, to have them held over past their 10 hours, and the research is there, it is irrefutable. When our bodies do not get the rest that it needs, we are not the same. If we continue down this path for status quo, the next chief standing before you will be asking why. 10-hour shifts plus more hours impact sleep, wellness, relationships, communities, and families. Extra policing is broadly popular across racial groups from this study of Civis Analytics. And they asked in a poll, in a survey, some members of your state, if they were to propose increasing the budget for the police force and hiring more police officers in high crime areas, would you choose that? In a specific poll, 60% of African Americans, 65% of Latinos, and 74% of whites said that they support it. Providing money to put more cops on foot in our neighborhoods is a proven and cost-effective means of bringing crime down that offers a humane alternative to harsh prison sentences as a deterrent. It offers some prospects of cutting down on disproportionate uses of force as well. And I would just like to end, Madam Chair and committee members, at saying I'm absolutely proud to serve the 400,000 plus folks in this city of ours, great city of ours. And I'm absolutely proud of the work that our men and women are out there doing every day. But I have to come before you to advocate that this model is broken. And by the way, oftentimes in this day and age, unfortunately, when we talk about policing and better policing, the context is usually framed, it's an either or. And we become, in our silos, we become divisive, and we start to build brick and mortar around our own ideas so that we may not be open to listening. I've never stood before this group, or any, to say that policing alone is the answer. We need all types of housing. We need to address the drug epidemic that is surging and creating havoc in our city. We need to talk about jobs and employment. But specifically today, again, all of you were not here 30 years ago and 40 years ago. We are playing at a deficit. And it is now that I have to stand before you because this is on my watch. I have the information. We need more resources. And we also need more community resource. So with that, Madam Chair, committee members, thank you.
Thank you, Chief. I'm going to look around to see if we have any questions. I have a couple of questions of my own, but we'll allow Councilmember Fletcher to go first.
Thank you, Chair Cano, and thank you, Chief. I've got several questions about this presentation, and I appreciate you bringing this forward. You know, it said in the RCA that this was responsive to a request that we had made about some curiosity about staffing. I'll say it doesn't really get at the conversation that was happening there, so I'm going to ask some questions around how our staffing levels have actually been working, because this isn't really certainly what I was getting at when we were talking about staffing levels, because I think everybody needs to understand what staffing levels are happening. And I want to just say something real quick about the last slide. If we can go back to slide 38. I respect you and I like working with you, Chief. Yeah. And I think it's very, very important that your analysis not delve into politics. Let the politicians fight out the politics of this stuff. We are relying on you for factual information about what's happening in your department. And for you to make the case that it is politically popular for us to increase staffing in your department does not belong in this slideshow. And I am worried that if you continued down that path, it would undermine the community's trust in your analysis. And I do not want that to happen.
Madam Chair, Councilmember Fletcher, I did not believe I was trying to be political. I have never been one to be political. So if I've offended you or any members here in this body, or in the public here, my apologies. So,
okay. Thank you. So that being said, let's get to some of the questions that I've had this year have been around how are we maintaining our staffing levels within what we authorized? Because I think one of the things that's challenging to assess is we've authorized 888, and there are people who are arguing that 888 isn't enough. There are people who would like to see the force reduced. We heard from both of those perspectives here in the room. But the number fluctuates quite a lot, and so when people are looking at what's the actual coverage that we're getting and you know, what are we actually seeing, the question that I had actually had was sort of how is that working in relationship to retention and academy graduations and a lot of that kind of stuff. So can you just tell us what's the patrol level been? Because it seems like we're actually at a very high patrol level relative to what we've normally had in like this month. So can you just give us a little bit of that history and help us understand how that's fluctuated?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Fletcher, so one of the things that, again, language is important, so we always tend to fall back on 888 and equivocate that with patrol officers, and I like to try to steer away from that because I think most people when we're talking about 911 response, they're talking about the officers, the men and women in the cars responding. So we are at about 600 now. We've been higher back in the 90s for that. We've just also taken on much more needs that have happened over the course of time. And of course, we have to account for attrition. We have to account for everything from officers leaving. So the numbers just aren't there. And I think also too, to put it to frame it, we have been operating for so long with this mindset that 600 patrol was adequate. And I'm here to tell you that it is not, based upon the needs, based upon the asks and demands of our city and our community. That isn't. So I think we need to talk about what is really required, what is more, as opposed to getting too fixated on that 600 number. And I absolutely can have more discussion about projecting what I believe we will need to be able to deal with the trends that we're seeing, to be able to effectively have that timely response. But we are doing the best we can with the numbers we have. Yeah.
Thank you. Can we go to slide 13? And I'll just say while we're flipping to that slide, the reason it feels important is that we've got a statistic that says 262 times people have been held over. And so it's helpful to know in those weekends when people are held over, and on those shifts when people are held over, was our patrol force at the full 591 or 600 that we would expect proportionally out of the 888? There were parts of the year where it dipped quite a bit below that, right, while we were waiting for a new academy class.
Madam Chair, Councilmember Fletcher, I see we're focused on 3rd precinct, but we're saying mid-shift, the mid-shift downtown.
Sorry, I was, while she was going to that, I asked a follow-up question on, so no, I'm asking about, so the number you gave me last time you and I met a week ago was 591 as our patrol number, right? So I'll take your correction and go with the patrol number as the sort of relevant number for 911 responses. What was it at its low point? Because it's at the high point for the year was what you told me. Do we have that data available?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Fletcher, one moment here. So, Councilmember Fletcher, for patrol, January to February, let's go to 19 here. So as of January of this year, our patrol numbers are at 551. In March of this year, it was at 546. And at June of this year, it was at 591, but then I think we were down to 583. Some of this involves our cadets if they're in training. We don't count our cadets while they're in training, and so sometimes those numbers are absolutely going to fluctuate a bit. Yeah.
So some of the overtime demand was just related to the way we managed that attrition and the way we got people online and the timing of the academy classes. I just want to make sure I'm understanding in terms of the force level that we've authorized.
Madam Chair, Councilmember Fletcher, that is correct.
Okay, thank you. On slide 13, this is a great graphic, and it's, I just want to clarify to make sure I understand. This is demonstrative of 3 o'clock in the morning, but not of midnight, correct? Because the mid-shift overlaps with the overnight shift.
Madam Chair, Councilmember Fletcher, that is correct.
So at the peak 911 times, while bars are open, while there's a lot of activity, while we're getting a lot of calls, the graphic on 13 should actually look more like the graphic on 12.
Madam Chair, Councilmember Fletcher. So one, bar time for downtown, or this is 3rd precinct?
Sure.
It could vary. It could vary.
Yeah.
But I will say that my conversations with the supervisor off the shifts, it is never fully staffed. So
sure. I have more questions if my colleagues want to jump in. I'm happy to yield and come back.
Great. Councilmember Cunningham.
All right, thank you. And thank you, Chief, for this thorough presentation. If I remember correctly, this may have been a different conversation. We had asked about overtime. Is there still being work done about the amount of overtime that's being utilized by officers, both within filling shifts, but then also off-duty time in which they are when they're participating in officer buyback? Are we still looking into those numbers?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Cunningham, we are. So the first part of your question, yes, we are. Our supervisors are monitoring the overtime. Clearly, when officers have to be held over, that is a part of overtime. We are fortunate that our city, in terms of the part-time, we are taking an audit at that. And a lot of that is wrapped around, well, actually both are wrapped around the health and wellness of our folks. We want to make sure that they're not overstretching or overworking themselves. So we are doing both of those two things. Yeah.
Great. Yes. I as well am, and I know many of my colleagues are also invested in that particular aspect of impact of health and wellness, and officers being able to be mindful when they go from one call to the other, that call that they just finished, they're able to leave that call there and show up fresh to the next call and be able to meet folks where they are, rather than showing up at an 11. This really focused a lot on officers and response times. I'm particularly interested around investigators. This is something that we've talked quite a bit about. Can you give us an idea about how many investigators we have, and essentially maybe a little bit of the breakdown of where they are? Because I have a particular concern around investigators in the Special Crimes Unit.
Madam Chair, Councilmember Cunningham, I can make sure I get you a breakdown for all of the different investigative units. What I will say that the main units that we're seeing, we don't have enough investigators, and we're trying to do our best to fill those. Domestic assault unit, crimes against children is another one. Certainly our assault unit as well. And so those are areas, sex assault unit as well. Those are areas that we are trying to get more investigators in. But the caseloads there for one investigator, they're substantial, and so we are definitely trying to do our best to beef up those units. You mentioned response times to that. The response times does impact the work of the investigations. If our officers are taking hours to get to a call, there is the potential that witnesses at the scene will be gone, the victims may be frustrated, and there's less information or cooperation they may want to have with the investigator to help them successfully solve that crime. So, yes.
Great, thank you. I have two more questions and I'll yield to my colleagues. Councilmember Fletcher got to this a little bit, but I just wanted to maybe talk about it in we have about 40 to around 40 folks retiring every year with attrition. What is the annual hire? So what are the annual hires then looking like in juxtaposition to that?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Cunningham, so we as the Minneapolis Police Department, we try to at least get 2 hirings in a year, cadet and recruits. Those numbers will vary, and I will say to you, not only as Minneapolis Police Chief, but chiefs around the state of Minnesota and actually around the country, recruitment has been a challenge, and so those numbers can vary. If we could get classes of 30, and of course there's a lot of things that factor into that, the backgrounds process, just through going through the academy, that would be good, but those numbers can vary based on recruitment, based on the hiring process, and so, yeah.
So if we're having a hard time hiring, how much of these numbers that we're seeing is an impact because of the fact that we're having attrition that's higher than hiring? I know that we talked about 888, but if we're not even at those numbers to begin with, how much of this is being reflected, those challenges being reflected by the fact that we aren't fully staffed with the numbers that we have already?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Cunningham, that's a great question. And I think there's a couple of factors that will play into, that are playing into currently Minneapolis Police Department in terms of our hiring. Certainly, if our employees do not feel that they're being treated the right way in terms of their health and wellness, they will communicate that. They could potentially communicate that to potential candidates. That is one factor. We need to make sure, and I need to make sure, and lead the way, that I'm the ambassador for this police department, make sure that I'm doing everything I can to support the 888 people, and there's also our incredible civilian team members here. Public sentiment can also be a carrying card in terms of drawing in or not drawing in members from this community who ultimately would like to serve. So I think that's important to note. We have to support the work of the people who are out there serving. Again, if folks are feeling overstretched and they know that if you work a 10-hour shift and you're going to be held over the majority of the time and not go home to your families, that will impact a lot of this as well.
So kind of didn't get to the point, so I understand we're having some challenges around recruitment and hiring, but if we are not hired at the amount that has been authorized, how much of the challenges are we facing in terms of staffing and, priority one calls? How much of that is because of the fact that we're having recruitment and hiring challenges rather than just not enough officers in general?
Madam Chair, thank you for the clarification, Councilmember Cunningham. It has a major impact. If our numbers do not keep up, and remember, we're playing at a deficit. There's conversations here today, and I just want to remember we're focused on this 888 total, but we've had a higher force back in the 90s. So it absolutely is playing, because if we do not continue to at least meet those levels, these maps are going to continue to get worse.
Right.
Yes.
Okay. So what I'm hearing as well is that there has to be some intentionality around recruitment and hiring, and that's a little bit sort of out of our purview a little bit, but we can figure out what that looks like. And then my last question is around police culture. So if we have So we have issues with policing. This is something that you openly discuss and are really actively looking to transform. A concern that I have, and I know that there are other folks that share this concern, is will growing the number just grow that current culture? How do we know that the challenges that are that the tension between community and police officers, how do we know that that's not just going to scale? You know, it's the theory of change that we're operating with is that more officers will inherently change the culture. But if we have more veteran officers and new folks coming in and they're like, oh, this is how you do it, don't listen to the training or don't listen to that silly city council, like, you know, if that is the culture, how do we know we're not just going to scale those challenges? Because we're operating with that theory of change with the assumption that inherently more will change the culture.
Madam Chair, Councilmember Cunningham, that is a very, very good question. And let me tell you, when I had that same conversation a couple of weeks ago, the Washington Post reported last year in our country, 998 people were killed at the hands of police. 998. And for those officers that were found to have committed a criminal act, as well as they should, if they were found to have committed a criminal act and gone through that process, judicial process, they need to be tried, sentenced, and held accountable. John Hopkins last year did research. The third leading cause of death for people in this country is through medical errors. People going to hospitals seeking help and treatment to help them. 250,000 Americans died last year seeking help for medical errors. They believe that that number is probably closer to 400,000. Now, when 998 lose their life at the hands of police, there are some that would say we don't want to hire any more police. when 250,000 Americans died last year alone. Third leading, matter of fact, the only two other causes leading that was heart disease and cancer. It would not be logical for us to say, let's not hire any more ER nurses, let's not hire any more surgeons, and let's not hire any more doctors because of the act of an individual. We have to hold those people accountable, but there would be greater deaths and catastrophe if we did not hire more nurses, doctors, and physicians. We have to be holding our folks accountable in policing. But the notion that when we have an officer that is not held or that is not accountable, that does misconduct, and I'm responsible on my watch to make sure that those officers are held accountable. But for us as a community to have the reaction, we should not hire police officers, men and women, to go into harm's way when we need them. I don't buy that argument at all.
So thank you for that. And I will respectfully push back because I feel like that's comparing apples and oranges, because I hear what you're saying, but if we had fundamentally flawed training in medical training, then we would address that and get to the core of that challenge. And so, and I'm not just talking about officer-involved shootings, I'm talking about general culture overall, which is toxic in a lot of ways. And so, I hear what you're saying about accountability, and we have those accountability measures in order with the Office of Police Conduct Review, Internal Affairs, and so I hear that, and I absolutely respect what you're saying, and I'm not inherently saying don't hire more officers. I think that the question is how. Again, the theory of change that we are operating under is the assumption that increasing the amount of officers will inherently change the culture of the police department. But we don't have measures in place in order to actually change that. We have really amazing leadership in you and your ability to be able to change the culture of the police department through your leadership. But when we get down to the rank and file, there are a lot of folks who don't necessarily carry the same perspective and values that you do. And so how are we going to scale the department, but do so in a way that's leader-proof? So whoever the chief is, whoever the inspectors are at the police department, that we have a different culture. So we're not just scaling up this toxicity is essentially. So I hear what you're saying, and I respectfully only push back because I don't really see those as as equivalent. So, and it's not just about people dying. It's about just everyday interactions. It's about how folks view the community. It's about how folks feel that their job is. Like, if there is a culture of every call that I show up to is inherently a threat, folks feel that. And of course, officers are under, they experience threats and dangers on the job. So I don't want to undermine that or play that down. I absolutely respect that. And also, folks want to be able to call the officers without them showing up with the guns already out at them for calling. So that's more the nuance that I'm talking about rather than just officer-involved shooting. So I just wanted to put that out.
And Madam Chair and Councilmember Cunningham, I respect your pushback on that. If we take away what I said about police fatalities and medical errors and just concentrate on the data as we have it today before us. If we keep things status quo, the next chief before you, you talk about how do we really change the culture? We won't do it by this. So I just want to say that if the levels stay the same, just as they are today, the next chief coming before you will have a very, very significant, difficult time in achieving that. So. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. I'm sorry, we do have a couple of more questions, and I want to allow the council members who haven't had a chance to speak yet to speak. So we'll go ahead with Councilmember Ellison and then Councilmember Palmisano.
I'm happy to go, but I did see Palmisano's tag up before mine, so I just wanted to...
Thank you.
Yeah,
yes, very gracious of you. Go ahead, Councilmember Palmisano.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, colleague Councilmember Ellison. I do have another meeting at the airport that I'm supposed to be heading out to right now. I'd like to point out that with DC Knight's help, and I don't see him anymore in the audience today, but we have been looking at recruitment as a council of police recruitment and how we can do better by that. It is in our purview. I don't think it's not in our purview. I absolutely think it's our business to look at that deeply. I'm happy to share that audit report for you that we approved, but let's definitely save that and talk about that in the future at a public safety meeting if or consider that, Madam Chair. So I just wanted to correct something somebody said earlier. It is absolutely in our purview to look at how we can do better recruitment of our peace officers here, and I think it's part of our job. I have a question for the chief, and that's that historically, over the course of your career, how has staffing numbers to respond to 911 calls been in accordance to our city's population over the course of your career? I think that what you're saying, I think the big point in some of these slides in your presentation is that it's reasonable to say that you allocate more than ever before resources to prevention efforts, things like gang violence intervention, resources to be helping to reach out with other partners like Sergeant Snyder to address many, but not all of the issues that are being brought to our attention by members of the community, very serious issues, homelessness, addiction, these other kinds of issues. But I think that what you're saying is that relative to our city's population, the number of squads around the clock on 911 response is lower than ever. Is that a big takeaway of this slide presentation, Chief?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Palmisano, thank you for your question. If I look back through my 30 years with the department, the days of, and I remember when the North Side Precinct patrolled all downtown and roll calls were standing room only. Those days do not exist anymore.
And that was actually a second question I had is, could you help remind me how the first precinct came to be?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Palmisano, yes. Forever, we had 4 precincts in the city of Minneapolis within the police department. The North Side Precinct, 4th Precinct, was responsible for downtown Minneapolis. I remember Squad 411 and 421, which patrolled the Hennepin Theater District and over by Loring Park. It was adequate at that time. We did not have the downtown, the size, scope, and scale that we do today, whether it's the corporations and the businesses. Certainly downtown has become more residential. There's schools downtown, there's shopping and grocery stores. The footprint of downtown has changed dramatically. Matter of fact, during those years, there were more surface lots in downtown Minneapolis, not today. So when downtown in the 90s really started to burgeon and a lot of people coming into our downtown and living downtown, it was decided we needed a response downtown to respond as quickly as possible and to have a precinct downtown. We had to pull personnel from the other 4 precincts, and that's what really created, and that is how we ended up with the first precinct today, which gave us 5 precincts. Yeah.
Thank you. And I just want to reiterate the chief's point that if we remain status quo on 911 response staffing numbers here, will these issues fix themselves?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Palmisano, absolutely not. I also want to just say, because I talked so much about the health and wellness of our men and women, that one particular slide of 1,200 of our community members calling 911 and not being able to get a response, I do want to say that we have great partnerships with our MECC dispatchers and call takers. They go through a lot too, having to tell that caller that we can't get a squad out to you right now. And so I just want to name that because we work so closely with them as well. And so that impacts a lot of other folks within our enterprise.
Thank you for that. And I, to your point, I want to share that when we talk about public safety as policymakers, we see that as a more coordinated whole. We absolutely also integrate the 911 call takers with how we respond to emergencies. And it is important to keep in mind, I was speaking just last week with county commissioners about the importance of 911 and how we keep their wellness and their roles in a healthy place, in ways that we can better support them, perhaps working together with the county in the future. So thank you. I'll yield to others.
Councilmember Ellison.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just had a couple of questions. One is about the presentation itself. You know, mostly we have these conversations in this setting because we are trying to give information to the public that they can make sure that they can sort of make that they can consider. And it gets really tough in situations like this when we don't really have, we're not offering the public really a comparative analysis for what we're experiencing as a department. Thinking about page, I believe it's 15, slide 15. Really either the last two slides, pages 14 or 15. I'm looking at these numbers and it seems like a lot, right? But if I was to give you the number of emails and calls my office gets in a vacuum, it would also seem like a lot, but if I started to compare it to other council offices, you'd get a sense of whether it's a lot or not. Is this a lot compared to a city our size? Is this average? Is it low? And what's the proof? I believe it's slide page 36. We obviously want to see that number go down. Any city would want to see that number go down. But again, is this low? Is this average? Is this high? And what's the proof? I think those are things, not having that information really makes it hard for us up here and also the public to understand the nature of the problem, right? And so I just think that it would be great if we could at some point maybe get a comparative analysis for what do these numbers look like in other cities of comparable size, right? And so that's one thing I wanted to offer. I know you don't have the numbers in front of you, but do you happen to know offhand of cities in our region or of cities of similar size with regards to either one of those two slides, 15 or 36, how these numbers compare?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Ellison, thank you so much for your questions here. And I will also just, full admission, as preparing this, I knew I had to be a little bit comprised and brief in some of this, but this is absolutely a much longer conversation, and so obviously look forward to looking at some of that comparison data and sharing that with you and the committee members. Again, probably just for just in terms of population, this is just a few cities. So and this is just based on officers per population, Councilmember Ellison. So for example, if you look at officers per 10,000 population, city of Milwaukee, Wisconsin, 31.5 officers per 10,000. They have a force of 1,889 per 10,000 population. That breaks down to 38.8. And of course, they have a total estimated population of 600,000. But looking at more towards Minneapolis' size here, Kansas City, Missouri, officers per 10,000 population, 28.3. They have 1,356 officers with a population of 479. Minneapolis, officers per 10,000 population, we're at 20.30. With number of officers, what I just described, 888. So we're at 24. So I mean, there's other cities too. That was Kansas City, Missouri. Kansas City, Kansas, they have 22.40 per 10,000. And they've got a population of only 150,000. So in our sister city, actually, in terms of per population, they actually beat us by a certain percentage. So, but these are more comparison data I can certainly get to you. So,
and I think when it comes, that data is certainly helpful, sort of population size to officer count. But I think also when you look at self-initiated versus 911 calls. It could be that those other cities have much more, who knows, right? Sure. They could be getting more self-initiated actions from their officers. They could be getting more 911 calls. My point is that it's hard for us or the public to know when we can't have that side-by-side comparison. And the same is true when it comes to the overtime. I know that we've seen recently, that there is there was a USA Today sort of article a couple of months ago that talked about how across the country that police staffing has gone down, that crime rates have also gone down, and we know that they sort of singled out the NYPD as a organization that has purposefully sort of reduced their staffing, but in the last 5 years, but has also seen crime go down. When we're thinking about how we're utilizing officers and how we're deploying them, are we looking at cities that are reducing their staffing and seeing their crime go down and sort of analyzing why that might be the case, and then assessing how we could be making similar changes to address that? Because I know that there's not conclusive data about more police, less police, increased crime, combat crime. I think that it's muddled enough to say that there's no conclusive answer that says less cops equals this, more cops equals that. But there are sort of cities that we can compare ourselves to and analyze. Are we doing that analysis and figuring out how we can make changes to how we deploy our officers?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Ellison. So I've looked at a couple of different cities, and it's been real just rudimentary at this point, because I think, of course, different cities have different needs, and there's certain different asks of them. But I would like to get to a place. I think the question you pose is a good one. From my perspective, I like to look at it as, is the Minneapolis PD, or has the Minneapolis PD ever been at a staffing level that was adequate first? And then can we look at how we reduce that? And I will also just say on that point, so I don't believe that we are there yet. But I would like to get our department to a point where our staffing levels were adequate, and with some of the work that the Office of Violence Prevention will do and some of these other community collaborations, if we got to a level where we were adequate first, and then could look at how do we now, built-in attrition, reduce hiring, those things, we're not there, in my opinion. We haven't been for quite some time. But I absolutely want to look at how some other cities have done that. Hopefully with the premise they were at a level where they were staffed adequately and then could look at reducing.
Yeah, I see. Thank you. And then I have just one last thing I wanted to ask about. I know that two council members, Fletcher and Cunningham, have already kind of touched on this, but looking at actually at the slide that we're already at here, page 36 here, to put more plainly, if we were staffed at the level that we needed to be currently, we could get this number down even at the current, even at the 888. Is that correct?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Ellison, if we were absolutely staffed where I think we need to be, absolutely we could get that down. And I also want to I want to go back to the wellness. So as council members and community need to hold me accountable for our officers, I cannot emphasize enough, if we've got tired and overworked officers out there, those complaints are going to go up. And that data is there across the country. And so, yes, I agree. If we can get adequate staffing and get that overtime numbers down, that would be a goal.
So I guess, so to ask kind of the question in a different way, if we're struggling to kind of stay staffed at the 888, wouldn't we then in turn struggle to stay staffed if we increase that number? I guess if we allocated more officers, could we fill the positions, I guess is the question.
Madam Chair, Councilmember Ellison, so again, we throw the 880 out. I know that we always do it.
Absolutely.
If we talk about the 600, if we got that 600 up, that's what I want to see it go down. We again, it's been nomenclature, and we've been using the word for so long throughout the history of the MPD. But the 888 includes me, it includes my team here. But for the 600 men and women who are going to be the ones to respond when you pick up the phone and call 911, yes, if we get that 600 number up, we can reduce, I believe, that 262.
Cool.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Councilmember Fletcher.
Thank you, but I want to go back to his question and just ask, so if we increase the 600 by, let's say we added 30 to that, which I think is close to what you're asking for in the budget, do we have a recruiting program that could increase those numbers to that level and while keeping up with attrition? Is it even possible?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Fletcher, so we do have a recruiting program that we could try to, for this budget ask, we could certainly try to get to that number. If the question is, would that make a dent in that? Is
No.
that, oh, okay.
My question is,
Okay.
we've budgeted right now for about 600.
Yes.
In this year's budget. You're asking us to increase that, is my understanding. We haven't gotten to budget season yet, and we don't know what the mayor's going to ask for. But hypothetically, if we said, let's make it 630, could you do that with the level of attrition and the recruiting challenges that you've described?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Fletcher, I believe we absolutely could get 30 through recruitment, yes.
Okay. So going to this 262 slide, what time does the mid-shift end in the first precinct? I should know that, but I don't off the top of my head. Does it end at 2 like it does in the other precincts?
Earlier shift, there's a power shift.
Right.
Yeah, in the middle of the mid-shift. Right here.
So even as a staffing consideration, and I think there's a few people in the room who, like me, have spent a bunch of time out late at night, there's always a level of what's going to happen when the club's let out. I have a hard time seeing a supervisor releasing people on a regular basis on weekends at 1 in the morning, knowing what's happening on First Avenue. It just feels like that number might actually not even be indicative of staffing, as much as like maybe we need to think about realigning our shifts or think about how that works so that we're not in a position where people are scheduled to get off an hour before the bar's let out. It just feels like that's almost never going to be something that we release, especially over the summer.
Madam Chair, Councilmember Fletcher, so you're saying that the mid-shift is...
I'm picturing being a lieutenant standing at the corner of 4th and 1st at 12:30 and telling a bunch of my officers to go home, and I'm having a hard time picturing it at that time. So I'm just wondering, like, should we be shifting? Yes. Right? I mean, it just feels like we're setting that up for, it always feels when you're out on the street at 1 in the morning, like it's building to a moment of something's about to happen and we need to be ready for it. So I think it would be very, very hard to have the supervisory instinct to say, you guys go home. So I'm trying to figure out how we solve that 262 number, and it almost feels like realigning the shifts a little bit or something. It might be an approach that would get us to people going home on time more often. I'm curious what you think about that.
Yeah. Thank you, Councilmember Fletcher, for that question. I'm Assistant Chief Josen. I've been an inspector in the 1st Precinct. I've also been a shift lieutenant in the 1st Precinct, had midwatch years ago. So 1st Precinct is a unique precinct from all the precincts. The way they staff that precinct is you have your days, mids, overnight shift, and then they have a power shift. The power shift was created because of the bar close. It's the biggest shift in the precinct, and it's where we intend to cover all that closing operations and bar operations. The mid shift actually gets off earlier, and as supervisors, as the night goes on, they monitor the different clubs and the different entertainment venues that are taking place, and when they see crowds starting to get to a certain size, or maybe the parking lots are full, or maybe they have had some incidents that have tied up personnel, they have to make the call sometime in the evening to say, okay, we're going to need to hold the mid shift to get us through that bar close because we're short. The 262 that we were talking about, the calls that are pending that we're on, that's kind of a different issue. Those are two kind of different issues. They can be the same issue downtown, but in general, downtown, they're making that call based on a perception of the problems that may happen at bar close, so they hold resources.
That the number of times that 1st Precinct mid-shift were held over.
Oh, okay. So. Yeah. So definitely, I'm sorry, I was thinking of the other slide you had with the calls that we were unable to respond to. But definitely the downtown, you have to make that call before. That's usually made, unless there was a shooting or something like that, that you've tied, your resources have been tied up and you clearly have to hold them. I would like to, if I have 1 second, to talk about a question that's come up multiple times, and I was hoping I could help the chief with that question, and you've done an excellent job, by the way. But the question of the 888 and maintaining that, we have no problem maintaining the 888. That's not a problem at all. The issue is we stay within our budget, and so we always ask our finance person, Robin McPherson, who's sitting over there, and she tells us how many we can put into a rookie class, and we end up going above and below that number throughout the year as long as we average to keep within our budget. It's not that we had 300 people in the last applied to be officers in the current recruiting class we're going. We had 350 in the previous one. We have plenty of people that want to be Minneapolis police officers, but we have to stay within our budget, and so that's why you see that above and below flexing of the 888. We just try to make sure that we don't go over budget at the end of the year, so that's where we're at with that.
And so I want to ask then about, because I totally agree that we need a status quo change, that we need to be able to respond better and smarter and figure out how to make changes. I think we have a lot more work to do to figure out what those changes are. And I think we heard some people reference the 911 study. I know you guys are doing a study of buyback and off-duty and figuring out sort of, are those allocated in the right way, or should we be thinking about that differently? One of the things that's working about the NYPD is right now that they've gone to a very flexible staffing model where they can move people around. And so what reminded me of that is your narrative about how the first precinct was formed, and this sort of resource competitive model where we say somebody works in the first precinct and they're in the first precinct, and that means they're not in the fourth precinct, and that means they're not helping in the second precinct. And so how do we figure out how to be more flexible in our allocation of resources? Because what's striking to me is that you describe the creation of the first precinct as creating a resource vacuum, but nothing about our internal organization would have changed the amount of crime happening, right? The first precinct was then dealing with the crime downtown that had been on the fourth precinct's table. And so what we really need in a lot of ways is to be able to think more flexibly. And I'm wondering, have we thought about ways to do that so that if we know that something's happening in the third precinct that needs resources, there's nights when those 4 cars, frankly, in some precincts would be too much because they don't really get a lot of calls between 3 and 5 in the morning. Not every precinct, not every night, but if you can get into predictive models, get into really thinking about what do we know about what's happening on the ground, how can we move people to the right places, I think that would be something that that might help us use our resources better. And I'm curious, does the Federation contract even allow that kind of flexibility? Can you move people around the board that way?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Fletcher, so one, we are looking at scheduling and staffing to see how we can best do that. We also continue to look at what drives MPD response. As I mentioned in the slide here, people in crisis, over 50% over the last 5 years. Shootings have gone up over 28%. So we will certainly continue to look at different staffing models in that. There are things that we can do which is flexible in terms of staffing out at precincts. There are some contractual issues that may have to do with hours of that with the Federation contract, but really we really rely upon our inspectors too to look at shift hours and those types of things. So we're working as diligently as we can to with the personnel that we have to look at how we can better achieve it with the numbers that we have, and still addressing the increases in other areas that we're getting response to.
Great, because I know we are seeing some really good police work in some areas. There are places where there are resources that we've committed that are having tremendous results. We heard testimony about Elliot Long and then Marshall Collier at that substation in the second precinct. I think that's been a very successful program. We've heard often from Grant Snyder about the work that he's doing. It's very specialized, dedicated work. It's not something that fits in the bidding program. So, and we heard testimony from a lot of people about wanting community officers. I know Inspector Frizzell requested beat officers for downtown that he did not get in the draft because of that process. And so one of the things that I think is challenging is that people want us to ask for more resources, but we're not clear that we're going to be able to put those resources where we think they would be effective or where they would work. So can you describe how the 70-30 rule works and sort of what would need to change in the contract for you to have management rights to actually assign staff where you think you need them?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Fletcher, so the 70-30 rule per contract, what that does is it allows inspectors to make sure that they have at least 70% of their personnel responding to 911 calls. The other 30% are those officers that are critical to dealing with a lot of the livability issues. All of you have community response team members who may be dealing with prostitution or drug dealing. And so the inspectors have that delineation to, obviously we need to make sure that folks are responding to 911 calls, but there are other sorts of issues that are happening in the precincts where they're going to need a more follow-up presence, whether it's through CERT teams or some of those beat officers. And so so that's the 70-30 rule. Now I will also say this here, we need to have those officers, obviously, and I'm not saying you're not saying we don't, but we need to have those officers that can work on some of those livability issues. I know that the 3rd Precinct CERT did some wonderful work and has been doing some wonderful work in trying to curtail the narcotics dealing off of Lake Street and East Phillips, and so that's needed. The 1st Precinct CERT team has done some wonderful work recovering guns and things of that nature downtown. It's just, again, the balance of what's going to be more responsible in terms of if those 911 calls continue to keep coming in. I do not want us to have a police department where the only time that our community members engage with our officer is at some adversary moment where they're just responding to them. That is not healthy, productive for the officers or the relationship with the community. But contractually, that is the 70-30 rule. 70% for 911 response, 30 to deal and address those other livability issues.
Okay, and so 911 response has gone down. Like 2015 to 2018, it's down over 10,000 calls. So it feels like there's almost no correlation between staffing requests and what these 911 calls and the response times. So I just want to note that our demand actually seems to be going down. There's sort of a narrative that builds sometimes around our population going up, and that more population means we need more officers. More population means more calls. In fact, more population often means more eyes on the street and less crime, right? A lot of times we actually, part of the reason we justify fees for vacant buildings is because we have to police areas where there's blight and stuff happening. So there's a narrative here that I think is important for us to note that 911 calls are going down. It's entirely possible that in terms of the response that people actually want, it is not 911 response squads, except in some targeted places, right? Because we have this differentiation between precincts, so sometimes we end up with shortages in places where it doesn't necessarily make sense. So if we could think about our staffing model to respond to 911 more efficiently with the resources we have, and then be able to put resources into community policing, which we currently can't do. Let me ask this, could we even do a traffic enforcement unit at this point? Or would that have to be the 30% if they're proactively would we have to hire 7 911 responders in order to get 3 traffic enforcement cops?
Chair, Madam Chair, Councilmember Fletcher. First, I want to go back to your statement about 911 calls going down. I think we need to be cautious about saying that that is somehow, as we heard today, and I certainly have heard, when people in our community give up on calling 911, that may tell a different story. Also, the self-initiated activity that our officers are doing, that is going up. And so I just want to make sure that we're clear that I don't want to give the narrative here today that just because we're seeing some drops in people calling 911, that means that things are fine. And also we're seeing our officers spending more time on these calls, whether they're crisis calls, overdose calls. Last year alone, Minneapolis police officers spent 34 calendar days responding to overdoses. So I just want to put that in context. So as far as traffic unit, I've heard through across the city the traffic is, in matter of fact, the data shows that it's gone up. It would require taking an officer out of each precinct. But right now, many inspectors are assigning an officer right now just to try to manage that. So basically, it would be saying, can we get him full-time to do that? So, yeah.
But does the 70-30 rule, would they be in the 30? Am I correct in understanding if they're doing proactive traffic enforcement rather than responding to 911 calls, that they would be part of the 30% in that ratio?
Madam Chair, to Councilmember Fletcher, actually it would be a centralized unit, so it would be a different, they would take them out of the precinct. They would be a centralized unit. They would not operate out of a precinct. They would be centralized, so it would be a traffic unit. They would not operate out of they'd be a citywide traffic unit. They could be assigned to Broadway Avenue. They could be assigned to 38th in Chicago. They could be assigned to Hennepin and Franklin. So if that makes sense, it would be a traffic unit. They would not be assigned to a precinct. under the 70-30. They would not be part of if the first precinct has 120 officers, the traffic officer working first precinct would be assigned to a unit downtown, not out of the first precinct.
Understood. Isn't 70-30 citywide though?
For the 5 precincts, it doesn't include units that stand alone.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
All right, we still have people in queue waiting for their turn to ask questions or comments. So I think Ellison was before you. So we'll go ahead with Councilmember Ellison and then Councilmember Cunningham. Oh, sorry, I did want to say Council Vice President Andrew Jenkins has joined us.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just looking here at the slide 16, and we've heard the term status quo, changing the status quo mentioned a couple of times. I do think that there's maybe a difference in what that status quo is that we're trying to change. And I wanted to just sort of get your perspective on if I'm looking specifically at the EDP responses, the sort of the third listed time consumer for officers, and I'm sort of wondering. I'm sure that there are some events where folks who are emotionally disturbed have weapons on them, but I'm also sure that there are plenty of times where they don't. Is it appropriate for officers to be responding to those calls, or do we need some other mechanism that could free up officers' time? Some other mechanism to respond to these calls, in turn freeing up officers' time?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Ellison, both. Sometimes it requires, if a caller calls in and says, we have a gentleman who's wading through traffic, acting incoherent, until we can deem it's a safe situation where we'll send a squad first. That may also then mean that the co-responders may respond after that. There are going to be situations, maybe it's a neighbor calling 311 saying, could somebody check on my neighbor? He, might be, we need to check on him. He's been through crisis before. That might require a non-police response. But I think it's both. We are clearly saying, and I should also say too, when we talk about persons in crisis, and you certainly know this, when folks are homeless, they're experiencing trauma. When we talked about when people are hearing the sound of gunshots or witnessing a violent act, they may be experiencing crisis. So I think it is both. Clearly, our calls have gone up over the past 5 years, 50%, and we're seeing there's many in our community that are experiencing crisis, but we need both. And so, I know we have some great community folks out there that can help us with that. So I think it's both. Yeah.
And I ask that question just because I know that there are, Grant Snyder has been mentioned up here on this bench, and we're all familiar with his work, and there's some great work being done by individuals, officers. But I also know that when I see that and that we have officers, that's a number one time consumer of officers, I'm also sort of imagining. I don't know if Travis Jordan fell under the EDP sort of response, and I don't know if officers involved in the ketamine situation that we experienced last year, not that the situation was last year, but I don't know that if those were EDP calls, and that's concerning, right? It makes me question whether or not we really need to examine and maybe disaggregate EDP because it's a broad category, which EDP sort of circumstances require police presence and which ones don't. So that we're saving officer time, so that it's not in our top 5 of time-consuming calls, but also so that we're getting a better level of service for individuals who just, end up on the worst possible receiving end when officers aren't the right person to respond to that call. So that's one thought. And I had a follow-up question, but I should have written it down because I can't remember exactly. So I'll follow up later.
And Madam Chair, if I could just say to Councilmember Ellison that we also know, and many of you have said, crisis happens. It doesn't just stop at 5 o'clock when folks go home from the city. We currently have a model where at 3 o'clock in the morning, more than likely they're calling us. The more we can get community-based resources out there, absolutely will help our department. So yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Cunningham.
I'm going to make it quick because I have a 1 o'clock and I know other people do too. So I just want to make sure that when we're talking about the just sheer numbers of officers, sworn officers, that we are doing a full and correct comparison, because so you gave Kansas City as an example. I just did a little bit of searching, and they don't have actually like a Metro Transit Police department. They have 2 officers from their police department that are assigned to their transit system, and we have 120 full-time sworn officers and 60 part-time. So even if we were to include that, we still wouldn't have like the 1,100 that you had mentioned. But that is another body of sworn officers. You know, we have park police, and those aren't necessarily in all other cities. So just kind of wanted, they have various jurisdictions, but we do have other sworn officers in other jurisdictions that operate within the city that maybe is not comparable in other jurisdictions that are similar. So I just wanted to maybe put that on the radar for us to, I would be curious when we continue to have this conversation, how do those other jurisdictions impact our staffing level and the purview, because they have like a sliver of work that they do. So I just wanted to include that in our conversation as we look forward. So I really appreciate you having done the work and being intentional in our question and answer. I think that this is a very challenging conversation to figure out how do we change the status quo? How do we not perpetuate it in harmful ways? How do we do the work differently in meaningful ways? And I'm grateful to have you as chief. So thank you so much.
Madam Chair, Councilmember Cunningham, thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Chief. I did not get to ask my questions because everybody else was so busy asking theirs, but I know that you and I have a very close and open relationship where we've been working on a lot of different things together. I did want to acknowledge that this 911 issue is really important because these are residents who are self-electing to receive that service, and we're not able to give it. So I really want to be able to figure out how to make that better, and I want to respect your expertise and your leadership as a sworn officer. I am not a sworn officer, so I want to be careful about the solutions that I bring forward. I want to craft those with you. I want to craft those with our mayor and our other colleagues here. And just wanted to thank you for preparing this information. We will probably reach out to you to prepare perhaps other information in the coming meetings, because I think we're all interested in digging deep to figure out how do we provide better policing to the communities that are requesting it, that want it, that call me and text me saying, please fix this. We need your help. We don't feel safe. We want more support. And I've had really great stories from folks who have hugged police officers because they're glad that they're there on the block. And this is coming from Latino residents, from renters, from low-income communities. So I think this is a very dynamic, complex conversation that none of us are afraid to tackle, and that's why we're having these conversations. So thank you for the opportunity to learn with you, to share information, exchange ideas, and for everybody who stayed with us for the full 2.5 hours or whatnot. So without further business before us, we are adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.